Arnett, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Slocum,
Here.
Mr. Borowey,
Present.
Mr. Jenks.
Here.
You have a quorum of the planning committee.
That's a quorum. We'll waive the pledge until our regular meeting if that works for you guys.
Sure.
I know the single item on our agenda is the legislative recommendations, which Sean had provided to us, drafted on November 20th, and I think I got something on Monday as well. And it was the same from what I could see. And there was the backup included in those suggestions from him with Chief of Police Neil Dreif's comments on the latest legislative stuff having to do with the police and use of force and all that stuff. I would like to mention that Sean had asked if I wanted to have the chief here tonight for this, or if I thought it would be best that he attend the full council meeting or both. I thought it was sufficient to have him attend both. But I mean, just the council meeting. But I still feel, since we did receive this, we may want to discuss it. I don't want to rule not discussing it, but why don't we just simply start with Sean's draft, which was broken up into two parts. Maybe Sean, you can just give the backbones to that, and we'll start one by one.
Sure. So at our last planning committee meeting, we discussed sort of generally how we might divide up the legislative recommendations into those general requests that would be applicable to more towns, so to speak, and also those Cheshire specific requests that are, again, more specific to a request that Cheshire would be putting in, such as a land conveyance or something similar. So we did take a stab at doing so. Also, again, recognizing that if you combine the new requests from this year plus all of the old requests, we have a larger and larger number. I know there was some discussion of that last meeting as to what the best strategy was from a standpoint of prioritizing those initiatives that we'd really like our delegation to focus on. But again, it's really the will of the committee, however you'd like to handle some of those requests that we've put at the end of the list or removed from the list, so to speak. I did keep them all on there so that if you'd like to replace any of them, we certainly can. There are a couple that I feel just by nature of what's transpired that they probably don't need to be on there, just in terms of like the STEEP grant program, which we were advocating they bring back. They brought it back. Now, granted, it's a much smaller grant number than it used to be. But I guess we'll kind of take what we can get. I don't think sort of pushing specifically for legislation related to STEEP is necessarily something we need to prioritize, when I think they will continue the program hopefully into the future, even if it's at a little lower dollar amount than it was historically. So I don't know if you want me to just kind of go through each one, Tim, or if you'd like to just sort of have a general impression of
well, I think really each one, not that so much, I assume my colleagues, Dave, Jim, you've kind of reviewed these. If we started with the general legislative requests, you know, it seemed to me that obviously concerns with the 2020 police accountability is a big deal. And I think the chief can enunciate those pretty clearly tonight. And I certainly would be on board with those and perhaps others that may arise with questions with the council members. How do you feel about that, Dave and Jim?
I'm fine with this, the smaller version. I think it's more intense. I think these are things, it means something to us, both in general and for Cheshire specifically. And I'm fine with the pared down version that's more focused.
And that pared down versions, number one, addresses the police accountability bill, which the chief will speak to.
The chief has
juvenile justice reform, which I think is we're all living with the fact that they were reformed out of business, and there is no juvenile reform, and there's a lot of runaround situations with car break-ins and no consequences and stuff like that. So I assume that's in that souffle of how to address that. And that's why I would be on board with that being on the short list. Prevailing wages, the third thing you mentioned, and it was good that you recapped how, they did make the big change, but then on the small jobs, we can't escape it. So I think we definitely should stick with that. I mean, that seems to be a no-brainer.
We do have more and more renovation type projects than, and 100,000 just doesn't go as far as it really does on any renovation project, frankly. So yeah,
It almost
agree that
seems
would be a
like
big help.
that might have been just something they just were dumb about and forgot about. And now it seems like, why would they have left that out? It just seems strange to me.
Well, I've talked, and again, I would let the legislators certainly speak to their
course.
perspective, but I've talked to some of them about it. My understanding is it was pretty intentional that it wasn't included. And
Really?
That
Really?
attempts to kind of raise that up to $1 million would maybe non-starters with certain,
Yeah.
with certain legislators. So who knows? But I think it's something that from a municipal perspective and for the taxpayer dollars that we're spending on these projects, it's something that certainly we're advocating for certainly from the staff standpoint.
Right. And the last thing on your shortened version, well, actually you had binding arbitration, which, seems obviously to put a time limit on it, seems to be beneficial to all parties involved. I can't see why we would want to wash our hands of that request. And finally, the enabling legislation for the community choice aggregation. I, for one, had a kind of a question mark on that. I think that got added last year upon the recommendation of the Energy Commission, which I think we should always pay tribute to the hard work that they put into. We never quite got around to understanding or recognizing how it really benefits the community at large. It simply lends a voice to any member of the community that wants to go that route. Is that correct? I mean, I just have a hard time with this one, understanding it.
Sure. So, I mean, again, and the reason I kept it on, just from my perspective, given that it was added by the council last year, but then they ultimately didn't have a real legislative session to speak of to take up a lot of these things. I know my understanding again is it wasn't passed or advanced the enabling legislation that would be necessary. And I know as we remember, the individual from the commission was very passionate about this.
Yep.
And they came to present, I believe, twice on the topic. Yep. Again, I don't pretend to be an expert on exactly how it would play out, but I did understand that it allowed a little more local control and an option really for folks to purchase, their electricity through this community choice aggregation process, and thereby, again, it's something that I know that they're looking to have us do. So I think.
Well, clearly, in light of all I know the kerfuffle that's going around with everyone's electric bills is obviously big news, and maybe that's a reason to, also keep it on the table. Okay, so I get that. There was actually no conversation on this at all after it was on our list because they just never addressed it at all at the legislative level. Okay, you guys have any impressions on that, input on that? You think it should stand and stay there and see what happens? I mean, it's not a negative. It's not a negative.
I'm kind of with you, Tim. I don't quite fully understand what it is, but I think that these 5 items for the sort of short list is fine.
Okay. You're okay, Dave? Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, that's terrific then. Now we go to the Cheshire specific. We start with transfer of the bus station property from the state to the town. Again, guys, no brainer, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Upgrading 68 and 70. And Jim, I think you had advanced this suggestion last year, and it dovetailed with efforts we have on, West Main anyway. That's really what we're talking about, right, guys? We're talking about like Main Street, West Main, to the
68
trail kind of thing, that kind of thing.
68, 70. I think I have, I think that what I would do instead of number 7 and number 8, I would actually take take those two off and put back on the municipal speed limit legislation and the sidewalk or the crosswalk legislation. I think those two items are more likely to be coming up this year in the Transportation Committee. And I think those are two that have had pretty broad support in the past. I would expect that they would get that support again. I just think those are two things that are more likely to come up this year. The 68 and 70 upgrade, it's currently designated to be a bike route, but I've kind of been round and round with DOT, people at DOT on whether or not they're going to kind of take the next step and make the kind of improvements to make it truly a safer bike route. I don't think that's on the agenda anytime soon. So I don't think it's something that our legislators would be in a position to advance at this point. And then the number 8, the CT rail thing is something that I think that needs to be sort of fleshed out a bit more, but I also think that investments in public transportation right now are probably not really on the horizon in the next year at least.
I have to say, Jim, that one, number 8, was the one that I just thought should be scuttled for some of the same reasons you're saying. I did have a question about bringing back the crossing thing because I was certainly, as we all were, advocates of better crossing because we've had 2 fatalities in town. Sean, to the extent that it seems as though there have been meaningful improvements made to crosswalks in Cheshire along Route 10 and West Main. To your knowledge, what hasn't been done in a significant way that, and maybe we have to ask the chief on that because I know their traffic division gets heavily involved in that. Where do we stand on that progress report?
Sure. So, I mean, I can speak to some of our more, significant crossings. Obviously, the West Main Hawk System crossing is a popular topic of concern and some debate. We have had our engineering department looking at the possible installation of permanent chicanes. You will see for the last couple of months, there's been, or I think maybe starting in July, we put temporary chicanes there. Chicanes are the 2 barriers that require you to navigate at a slower speed to try to stop what we see is probably the most likely issue at that crossing, which is somebody shooting out into the crosswalk at a high rate of speed. That being said, that's still a crosswalk that presents a number of challenges from just user error, if you will, or user understanding of how to activate and properly cross, and also the cars unclear about necessarily what they do with different flashing lights. So we continue to look, I think, for future education campaigns on that crossing. But the other more traditional crosswalks, as you said, with the traffic light upgrades that the state has been doing at all of our Route 10 crossings, those do come with the requirement, ADA requirements that new ramps and sometimes new signal activations are installed that kind of just make it a more obvious crossing as opposed to stepping off of a curb for obvious reasons. And hopefully maybe even a little bit visually for a car to think, oh, wait, that's a crossing. I see a couple of ramps. I should probably take a little extra care. I think the bill that was proposed, I don't know, maybe Jim, you could speak to a little better in terms of what the law was changing or the proposed change. But as I understand from just what was written, that currently it only requires drivers to yield when they're physically in the crosswalk, as opposed to kind of, that kind of gray area between when they're standing to cross, but exhibiting intent, or next to a button or clearly kind of watching cars. Technically, they don't have the right of way until they're physically in the road. Jim, is that
Right.
roughly correct?
Yeah. So the current law is that a car or driver doesn't have to stop until a person's actually in the crosswalk. The intended change is to make it so that a person just waiting to cross then has the right of way and the driver has to stop. So it's a little safer for a pedestrian for a driver to be stopping before they're in the crosswalk.
Right, which is comparable to like Massachusetts, right? I mean, that's similar to what I think goes on in Massachusetts.
Apparently it's the way it used to be in Connecticut too, until a certain point in the 90s or something where it was changed to the way it is now. I don't know why that happened, but this is basically a reversion back to what it used to be.
And this is
Oh,
only for non-signaled crosswalks, Jim? Is that correct? Because obviously with a signaled, the pedestrian has to wait until the signal changes.
Correct. Yeah, correct. But I think that I think the intent is kind of the same. As if you see someone waiting in the crosswalk, whether it's signaled or not, I think you're supposed to stop, or that's the hope would be.
Right, right.
I just, with regard to that though, I did have someone reach out to me the other day and said that she was a walker and was annoyed that cars were stopping and she wasn't planning on crossing.
Mhm.
And now it wasn't at where the Hawk is. It was, I think, on Higgins Road. And she was just standing there talking to somebody, and several cars stopped, and she had to keep waving them on, and they weren't really paying attention. A couple of them, someone coming over that hill could cause a problem. So she wasn't ready to cross and wasn't even looking like she was trying to cross, she thought. Yet people were, stopping, and, it's a problem to stop and going over that hill. So for
Well,
no
I
reason.
think people don't want to hit somebody, so you're going to get both sides doing confusing things. I mean,
Yeah.
that's apparent.
Yeah.
Going back to the chicanes, that's the correct way of saying that. Sean, if it's not permitted that the town invest. I mean, say for example, the town decided it had to spend $10,000 to have permanent chicanes. We can't do that as a town because it's state property.
No, we can. We own the trail on that spot, and we can install those there.
Because I think the council has to have a very serious conversation on that, because that seems to me to have made the most sense of anything that's been done
Mhm.
on that area. And I just think we should see to it that we make that a town priority, whether the legislature helps us or not. We should see what that costs to do it right, get them set up, and take it from there. That's my oar in the water on that one.
I agree.
Otherwise, Jim, I really don't object. If you're suggesting the removal of 7 and 8 and the reintroduction of one of Sean's, which one was it? I guess it's non-numbered.
They're kind of right next to each other. At the bottom of the page, it says municipal speed limits, and then it says pedestrian crosswalk safety. So those two items.
Yeah, it kind of slides onto the next page, actually, the way it was.
Mhm.
Probably needed a couple of returns in between those two paragraphs.
Okay. Maybe because my pages aren't numbered. Is that municipal? Is that where it's municipal speed limits? No.
At the end of municipal speed limits, here I can.
Okay. Okay. So essentially, is everything in that appropriate under municipal speed limits, or just a piece of this?
I think they're two separate, right? So municipal speed limits and
Yeah.
the pedestrian crosswalk safety were two separate proposals. I think they were
Right.
merged accidentally as I pasted them out. Into the-
Okay, so on the next page, now I see it.
Yep.
The town asked for legislative support for HB 7203.
Correct.
Okay, fine. So I don't object at all to putting that back in and leaving it at that. And also a public education campaign, whether they work or not. I still think it's incredible that it's so confusing for everybody, myself included. It just is. And if there was some standard that everyone understood, that would be great.
So I'm fine with that. We're still keeping it 8, which I think is reasonable, short list. 7, like Jim said, is already on its way. Some work being done there, so it's probably just them keeping an eye on it for us, which they'll do. And the rail, I'm not so sure how realistic that is.
Well, actually, yeah. So if we're eliminating 7 and 8 and simply reintroducing as number 7, the HB 7203 support, I think that's fine. That's what
Is that-
basically you're saying. Yeah, that's what we're
Jim?
saying.
And Jim, that's what you wanted?
Yeah, well, we'd be reintroducing the municipal speed limits, and then I think that number 8 would be the crosswalk thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So replacing 7 municipal speed limits as 7 and pedestrian crosswalk safety as 8.
Right.
So it's still items.
So if I take these two,
There you go. We got time. to
move
cut
them,
and
there we go. Paste them down here just to save them. And then I'll take
Yeah,
these two and paste them up here.
that's perfect. Then I'll look really intelligent when I give the report.
There you go. See, staff is wonderful.
They are. If you pay them enough ahead of time, right?
Never paid enough.
Okay, that's good. That dresses it up perfectly. I know you got to get to 8, but that'll work fine.
And
Yeah.
now these HB numbers, from my experience up there, pretty sure those were kind of good for one session.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
maybe should we just take out the HB references and just say in support of legislation that would,
Or even just indicate that it was formerly,
right,
Or, yeah, formerly, right.
formerly known as.
yeah, formerly known as, right? Pre-COVID.
FKA. Formerly known.
All right, so let's see here. All right, so is this one in the 2019 session, HB 6590, an act concerning municipal speed limits passed unanimously. I guess we can just leave all of this, right?
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
bill would allow Chester to lower speed limits on our own town roads if we chose to do so, and after a public hearing. Okay, we believe municipalities should have the right to lower speed limits where deemed necessary and prefer all, and would support a return to this legislation in the 21 session or something.
Yeah,
There you go. Mr.
That's-
Chairman, you want a motion to move this as a recommendation of the committee to the full council?
I think that would be excellent. The only hole we're leaving in it is what we're going to hear from Neil. But certainly for this piece of it, this makes complete
Right.
sense.
Last
And
year, I think
3
we
points
had
in-
15 items, so I think we're doing good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank you. I'm glad we all agree.
So should I just replace, again, I just took out support for HB 7203, or should I could just say for legislation
Formerly,
similar to, yeah. or
Right.
something like
yeah,
this.
because that at least gives something somebody can look up in an encyclopedia up in the Capitol.
Correct. And that was in 2020, I believe, Jim, correct?
Well, it was
19.
2019, but then
Oh.
it did come up again last year, but then the session abruptly
They
ended.
suspended, right,
Mm.
okay. So I'll say HB 7203, which would require,
It never came up for a vote again in 2020.
Right.
perfect.
And that was all COVID related, right, Jim?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's sort of just everything just sort of shot to hell.
And I think they are saying that this session is going to open virtually.
Mhm.
Well, although hopefully there's a lot more.
But
Yeah,
They'll
it's
be
certainly
better at virtual this year.
right, right.
I mean,
Wow.
really.
And that's legislation, because they're just not going to have the wherewithal if it's that way. And so it's going to be more focused, just like we are.
You know what? It might keep it more honest even. There's
Yeah.
no hallways to stand in.
So for this version, would the committee like me to delete these tentatively removed items or keep them in for the council?
Yeah, I think,
Or how-
I
how would
think
you
the
like-
committee is making a recommendation.
Mhm.
And I think that, we've reviewed all of that. I think.
I mean, they were in the packet anyway, so folks had them
Right.
if they wanted to raise them.
Right.
Yeah, I would just,
So just to kind of polish it up, I'll delete all of
yeah,
these,
I would, yeah,
and then it'll just be the chief's memo. There we go. Oops.
right.
And he had 3 points in that memo, which, I think we can support. And I'm sure we'll hear him impassionedly.
Yeah, because I assume there's going to be law enforcement presence on all of these kind of conversations.
Mhm.
And they can speak to it. We just need to be supportive.
Right.
So by and large, you're going to be just passing this along to the council, or it'll show up tonight when we start.
I'll email it if you'd like. I can email, if we're good with it, I'll email it now so folks have it.
Perfect.
And then
Perfect.
I'll put it on the screen similarly and you can walk through them. And or and I can speak to them, and obviously the chief can speak to really the first two. Again, I know that certainly like many communities, car break-ins continue to be a big issue, especially in this. So juvenile justice reform has an issue, kind of has come back and forth in waves as these break-ins seem to come in waves, but we're certainly in a peak of a wave right now. So he could certainly answer any questions you might have about that. And again, that's an issue that has, certainly, as we say, passionate, supporters and feelings on both sides. And I think it's a complicated issue, but we know that we believe this is one area that, again, hopefully the legislators can make some headway solving the problem. So.
Right. Okay, gentlemen, if there's really nothing to address further on this topic, that really brings us to, did we actually advance that as a recommendation? Did we vote on that?
I moved it. I think you want a second and then a vote.
Yeah. Okay, Jim, would you second that?
Yep, second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so motion to advance to council at our next meeting, which is coming up shortly, passes. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting and be back on board for 6 o'clock.
Should we get off the meeting or is this the same one? We should just close our screens?
Yeah, we just relog in.
Yep, same one. You can either relog in or you could keep it minimized if you're
Well,
comfortable.
yeah,
That'll help.
logging in, we'll see how it goes. All right, thank you.
Okay,
All right.
okay.
You also.
I'm gonna leave and just come back in later because I have
Education for items 3 and 4. I welcome everybody to the meeting tonight, especially the Board of Ed members that are here, to hopefully have some dialogue and answer some questions regarding the union issues in front of us in those items I just referenced. With that, can we have a roll call, please, Ms. Talbot?
Certainly. Mr. Borrowy,
Present.
Mr. Jinks. He's here. Ms. Nichols,
Here.
Chairman Orris,
Here.
Ms. Pavano,
Here.
Mr. Slocum,
Here.
Mr. Talbot,
Here.
Mr. Veliver,
Here.
and Mr. Walsh.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first item on our agenda is discussion and possible action regarding the Board of Ed teachers' labor agreements. It's my understanding, unless, any council members feels differently at this time, that we have until December 10th to make a decision. If we choose to make a decision as a council, we have another council meeting on December 8th. So I was hoping that we can have discussion tonight, get questions answered on anything that we all have questions on. Obviously, the Board of Ed and staff can make whatever presentation that they feel appropriate. And it's my hope that we will take this up at the December 8th meeting if we decide to make a decision either one way or another. So with that, I'll turn it over to whoever on the Board of Ed side is here that's looking to make a presentation.
Take that. I just want to start by, thanking everybody for taking the time to look through the documents that we've sent over. There's a lot of information, obviously, in one contract, let alone two. And so, I guess Rob said the teachers agreement first. That process, as many of you know, is legally bound, as is the administrator's agreement process, where there are definitive dates that we have to adhere to. The negotiations are not successful by a certain date. We're required statutorily to go to mediation. If mediation is not successful, it goes to arbitration. And as Rob was alluding to, you have the right to either and then the contract is automatically in force, or you can vote to adopt or deny the contract. If you deny the contract, the information that you see in front of you, it's basically as if it never happened. That goes to arbitration, and it's in effect starting over. So with respect to the teacher contract, there were numerous meetings with our committee and the teachers negotiations committee. I appreciate the amount of time that both parties put into this. There were several negotiation sessions that I think were beneficial, but ultimately not fruitful. And therefore, we had a Friday night mediation session. I'm glad it was Friday night. It was a very lengthy process. And ultimately, we came to agreement on what you have before you this evening. I would just want to hit on a couple of key language issues that were factors in the process of this agreement before I ask Ben to go through the financials. And certainly, we're more than happy to entertain any questions. I'm sure, the chair would love to hear from any board members, particularly if they served on this negotiation committee. So, as I said, the language, there are a couple of significant language adjustments here. First being that with the proliferation of online universities and education opportunities, that in our contract, in our teacher's contract, teachers can change pay grades by advancing their education. And it was imperative to us, and the union had previously agreed during the current contract to have more clarity so that people don't have access to fly-by-night university to get an advancement. And so we built language in to protect ourselves and also ensure that our teachers are getting a quality professional development learning experience that pays dividends for our students. The next item is that we're looking at collaborative time. The way we taught, particularly over the last several years, and what we see moving forward has changed. We are much more focused today on meeting individual needs of students. I think that approach has paid substantial dividends for our students. I've said before, our achievement has gone to 5th in Connecticut. It's pretty hard to top. And that's contingent on collaborative opportunities for our teachers to evaluate, needs of students, and then how to adjust instruction to support those needs. And so as such, we've added 2 early release days at the middle school and 5 early release days at the elementary school. There were a couple of others that we had in as central office days previously. We've helped kind of balance it out so that it doesn't provide the same burden on our families who may have to leave work to accommodate their children in early release days. Now, the last one is probably the most substantial for a number of reasons. In Connecticut, we were not able to identify another high school where teachers teach 6 courses. Another public high school. Teachers teach 5 periods on an 8-period day, almost universally. And Cheshire High, through this contract this year, has taught 6. For us, we look at that collaborative opportunity that we just indicated was so beneficial for the elementary and middle school. The same holds true at the high school level. And so we wanted to be able to assign that 6th period now for collaborative or instructional support time for students, intervention time. And we saw 2 things here. First of all, the declining enrollment trend is starting to hit the high school in future years. Each subsequent year impact on lowering enrollment by based a move from 6 periods teacher to 5, that without having to add staff for our students using that phase-in model. The other reality here is that in arbitration, given the fact that we are the only school that's doing this, it's a liability for us in arbitration, to be honest. So that's something that we're aware of, and I'm not releasing anything that publicly that the teachers union doesn't already know. If it were to go to arbitration, that would be a substantial strike against us because nobody else has that, and that's a consideration that arbiters use in the process. What do other people do? So I'd like to, at this time, turn it over to Vin, who can walk you through the financials. And then, as I indicated, certainly we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good to be here. Sean, I know you had the memo up. If you could bring that same memo up, I'll go through page 1 and show the financials. I appreciate Sean driving for us tonight. had a little trouble sharing the screen from this end. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great, thank you. So in terms of the financials of this agreement that's been achieved through mediation, you could see on the screen, and I'm reading from the memo that was issued, but we've got a 4-year agreement from July 1 of 21 through June 30th of 2025. The wage increases are, year one is 1.75% with no step advancement. And just to be, try and explain it, teachers that start working for the Cheshire Public Schools increase their salaries through step advancement there's 14 steps. So if we hire a teacher, the first 14 years, they're getting step advancement plus whatever general wage increase that is built into the contract. So the key thing about year one is it's a 1.75%, but the teachers below top step will not be advancing a step during year one of this contract. So 1.75%, we listed in the memo as the all-in number because there is no step advancement. In year two, the increase is 2.56%, and that's all in. And the components of that are 1.23% general wage increase, so all staff gets that, and 1.33% is the step that gets calculated in for those teachers that are below top step. Year three is 2.79 all in, 1.5% general wage, and 1.29% for step. And then year four is 3.02% all in, 1.75% being the general wage increase, and 1.27% is calculated as the step. So a couple of things just to highlight here. As of the first year in this contract, 62% of our teachers are at top step. So they've achieved, past step 14, so that 62% of the teachers will be receiving 1.75% in year one, 1.23, 1.50 in year three, and 1.75% in year four. So if you do the math on that, 6.23% is the 4-year wage increase for the teachers that are at top step. So year one, 62% of our teachers are at top step. And by the time we get to year four in this contract, about 73% of the teachers are at top step. And that assumes that the teachers we have today stay with us all 4 years. The reality is you do have attrition. So the cost numbers that I'm about to go through will be less than what you see here because it assumes that the teachers you have, again, stay with you through all 4 years. So that's the wage increases. I do want to take a minute now because I'm going to try and hit another document that we did send to the town council members, and that is what are the settlements that we're seeing this year. So on a year-to-date basis, with increment, year one, 2021-22, the average raise in other contracts is 2.68%. We're 1.75% in year one. Year two, we're 2.56% all in. The average among the other contracts that have been either negotiated, mediated, or arbitrated is 2.88. Year three, we're at 2.79. The average is 2.82. Year three, we're at 3.02. The average is 2.77. So if you took all 4 years in, the contract that we negotiated with the teachers is a bit below the average settlements that we've been seeing so far this year. I'll go through one more piece of information and then I'll pause to see if there's any questions on the dollars. So in this contract, in 21-22, the total wage increase, again, is 1.75%. That will amount to a $580,450 increase to our budget. Year two, which is 2.56% all in, that's 863,000. Year three is 965,000 with the 2.79%. And then year four of the contract at 3.02%, that equates to $1,072,000 in terms of budget impact. So I know that I put a lot of information out, and you know, this is generally one of the key things that there are questions around. So I'll stop there to see if there are any questions. And then I could talk a little bit about the medical benefits items that were negotiated.
Great, thank you, Mr. Masiana and Dr. Solon. I'll move to questions or comments from the council. Mr. Barwi?
Yes, a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The noticed under the chart you have for the increase, 580,000 the first year, 863 the second year, et cetera. It mentions that there's a $55,000 per year savings because of the increase in the co-share payments for the health insurance. Is that, say, 580,000? Is that net of that?
No, the salary increase is 580, and then you would subtract out 55,000 if you wanted to calculate the cost of the contract on a net basis.
Are there any other pluses or minuses to get the net cost of the contract?
No, and I pause when I say that because the piece that Dr. Solon talked about, that we're moving from 6 periods down to 5 periods in the high school, could potentially have a dollar impact, but the analysis that we've done so far, because enrollment is going down, we don't believe that there will be need to add staff at the high school. So it looks like that's going to be cost neutral for year one. The way that was negotiated is a third of the teachers in year one of the contract will begin teaching 5 periods instead of 6. Second year of the contract, another third, and third year of the contract, another third. So that's phased in gradually. So I would say, as I sit here now, the net cost of the contract is that 580 less the 55,000, and then you could do that same $55,000 subtraction off of the increase in the successive years. And as I said earlier, the other financial reality is the way we did the calculation on the salary costs year over year assumes that all the teachers stay all 4 years. And the practical reality is we do have teachers that retire. And what they do, generally a teacher is retiring at a top step and we're replacing them with someone, you know, generally we try and get new teachers in within the first 5 steps. So what we've shown in the illustration is actually going to be more than what reality would be.
Yeah, I think the reality there too is that in year one, we're not likely to see retirements. We just offered a early retirement incentive this year. So probability of increased number of retirements increases in each subsequent year of the contract, with the greatest likelihood of more retirements coming in years 3 and 4 in this deal.
All right, I appreciate the answer. I just have to say I slightly disagree about the idea that we're not having the cost of the teachers going from 6 periods to 5 periods, because if enrollment's going down, the expectation should be that there would be less teachers to keep class sizes the same. So really that is a cost, although it may not have absolute dollars, net dollars, but it should have been a savings if we didn't have to go from 6 to 5 periods. So, all right, thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Welcome.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. What is the current faculty level, and what was it 4 years ago? And you might want to get back to me in 10 minutes on that one. But in connection with a backward view, in the contract that we're concluding, you know, and prior to entering this one, what were the 3-year all-in wage increase is calculated at?
You know, I
I
don't,
should say not calculated at, but negotiated to.
so I don't have the year by year just in front of me, but the total contract increase all in the contract that's ending, Tim, was around 12%.
Mhm.
I think just below 12%. And now we're at 10.11 in this contract.
And that is a 3-year versus a 4-year, or are we
No,
comparing?
that was a 4-year as well.
That was a 4-year as well. Okay, so it's approximately 10.7 versus approximately 12. And that was after arbitration?
Yeah.
I know we went to arbitration, had some success there, but that may have been on the benefit side. I don't recall. Do you?
Yeah, the arbitration result was we got a reduction in year 1 over what was mediated, but year 2, 3, and 4, we didn't get a reduction.
Okay, so the savings were in year 1 and that brought us to 12, or we got to subtract those savings from?
No, I'm saying all in after the arbitrators lowered the results, and I can get you the exact numbers. I just need to run down to my office. So when I get a minute, I'll go do that.
Okay, okay. Well, I do appreciate that. And you may in fact not have the staff level, as it pertains to teachers. That's really my primary core interest in that basic period that we just concluded versus what they are currently now. That's of interest to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Yes, Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the salary chart that comes up, it's called the annual total salary. Does that take into account the teachers that are not hitting step in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years? Or are you just taking the all-in price and multiplying it by the total salary line item, and that's how you're coming up with the annual increases of 500, 800 million?
No, Tim, what I'm doing, Mr. Talbot, is I know you can't really see it, but what I do is we take all the teachers at each step, advance them, and add the general wage increase. So the numbers that you see in the total salary column and in the increase column are taken from, very detailed analysis, not just a raw number of times the percentage. So they do reflect reality, assuming that the teachers we have stay with us through those 4 years. Does that answer your question?
It does. It gets to, I guess what I was looking for is to, are those accurate numbers? And it sounds pretty much like you've done all the calculations, and that they are. So thank you. And then Sean, if you can scroll down, or no, actually you have it there where you talk about medical benefits there in the right below that chart, Vin. It talks about, and Mr. Barrow, we asked about the 55,000. That takes into account, then that's a good calculation that takes into account teachers that are not receiving their health care through CPS?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. I can't see the group. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Veliver.
Yes, thanks. Ben, if you can go back to I guess we'll go back to what Councilman Talbot and also Slocum had mentioned on this, and that 55,000. It's so, as I understand it, as I'm reading that, it's each 1% is a reduction in the sort of the total cost that you're showing per year, correct? Right. So in theory, so in the first year, if we go up, if we go from 14 to 15%, that would bump then the 580 down by 55,000
Right. What's happening is we're
as
shifting,
a total cost.
yes.
Right.
We're shifting the cost from the Board of Ed to the employee paying for their, co-share portion. And
Right. So I guess my question then is in each, and I get that part. I'm just trying to, is that 55,000 sort of compounded so that as we get up to 18%, we're going to be looking at $220,000 off the 1,072,000?
No, you wouldn't compound that. The short answer is no. What affects that 55,000 is that, the teachers will pay 15%, 16%, or 17% of whatever the allocated premium will be for medical costs in the future years.
Right.
They usually go up, anywhere between 2 and 5% on an average year. Next year they may go up, a bit more than that, but it's not compounded, David.
Okay, because I was just curious, so when it says 55,000 per 1%, I was just curious, so then 55 is the first year, if they go up another percent, is that adding another 55,000 onto the next year? So, so in the end, that 1.07 number will actually be something less if you factor in that they're now making 18% contribution, correct?
You look at it from that perspective, absolutely. If the teachers will be paying 4% more of whatever the total cost is 4 years from now.
Right.
You're not compounding, each successive year, but I see where you're going now, and yes.
So yeah, so compounding might not be the right word, but more addition. They're stacking on top of each other, that each one, as they go up by percentage, that number of savings or the offset on the salaries is going to get bigger. Potentially.
The cost shift is going to increase.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Veliber. Mr. Jenks, did you have your hands up? Yep, go ahead, Mr. Jenks.
You're on mute, Jim.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks. So Vin, how does the medical benefits package in this contract compare to the one that they're just coming out of?
Well, I'll just describe at a high level. The teachers have the ability to have the HSA, which is the core plan. And if they want, they can buy up to the PPO or HMO. And what that means is whatever the cost of the HSA to the Board of Ed is, the PPO and the HMO are more expensive plans. So the teachers would pay the entire cost difference if they want to buy into those plans. The HSA plan for the teachers has a deductible of $2,250 for individual coverage, $4,500 for two-person and family coverage. So I'm sure you know the way the HSA deductible works, that the first $4,500 if you're in family coverage comes out of your pocket, except for things like immunizations and well visits to a doctor. But the teachers pay the first $4,500 if they're in family coverage. The board contributes basically half of that towards an employee HSA, so $1,125 for single and $2,250 for two-person and family coverage. That is the coverage itself, the HSA deductibles are the same as they were in the current contract. The only thing that's changing is their co-share, the amount they pay to buy the coverage is increasing 1% per year.
Okay, great, thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. Other questions, comments from members of the council? Yeah, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you. Just a quick thing, since I'm new to this whole thing. If it does go to arbitration, I know, Dr. Sullivan, you mentioned one thing that they look at. What are the things that the arbitrator would look at in terms of the contracts? I'm assuming they look at what other towns have done, but I mean, what specifics do you think they would look at this contract that you may think may be an issue?
But, I did mention the courses in EHS. To be clear, that is they're not getting a prep period. That period that is reduced in terms of whole class instruction is directed towards student support or collaboration time, but administration directed. But the other areas that they're looking at are exactly right, Mr. Walsh. Recent settlements, they're looking at how do our contracts compare to surrounding towns, Anglic and the Derg. And basically they're looking at the town's ability to pay versus where we stand in relation to other contracts.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Other questions or comments? I see Ms. Pavano.
Unmute. Then I'd like to ask a question on the HSA and PPO again. If more teachers switch from the PPO to HSA, would the $55,000 go up? That amount that you said we would be saving? Would we be saving more than 55,000 if more people switch from PPO to HSA?
I have to think about that for a second. That's a really good question. Incrementally, and then just to put some context around it, we have about 80 teachers that
Ben, I think we lost you.
Yeah.
They're frozen.
Yep.
Sorry.
You stumped him with your question.
Good question, Sandy.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just texted him trying to get him back.
Yeah, seeing that.
Here comes Jeff now. Hey, Jeff, can you hear us?
I can. If you give me just a second too, though, I want to, Vin just ran out of here to jump on his, but his microphone is still on, so I can hear him running down the stairs.
Poor Vin.
No, it just rebooted the computer. So, such as technology in 2020, our apologies for that. The computer just decided to reboot in the middle of the meeting. So our apologies for that. And I know Vin will be able to respond to that question about PPO versus, if I could just for a second, jump back to Mr. Slocum's question about staffing ratios. And, I just want to make sure I'm getting you the right information. And so you were looking at what, just net teachers per student?
Yeah, since it's a teacher's contract, I figured, no, not the ratio of students, teachers to students. No, I was actually, my query was about the physical numbers of teaching staff then and now.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I do have that information at hand. And I don't know that I have the capacity to present screen. But actually I have the net staffing changes year over year, and it doesn't look like this table is linked to a spreadsheet. So I know that over the last since 2014-15 to 2020-21, we've reduced 10.4 teachers, and our enrollment is down over that period 314 students. So over the last I don't know, 8 years, we've, or longer, 8 years or so, 7, 8 years, we've reduced one teacher for every 30 students roughly over the last 7 years.
Okay. Well, I think I'd be happy to
Thank you.
ultimately have just a staff total at some point
Yeah,
from then
absolutely.
and now, because that ratio isn't terribly exciting to me.
Okay, Mr. Slocum, can we just jump back to Ms. Pavano's question? And I see
Absolutely.
Mr. Messiana's back,
Yes,
so
perfect.
welcome back, Vin.
I'm back. Sorry about that. So what I was saying is that the total, and I don't know where I froze up. So what I started saying is that it's a really good question about, if more teachers move from the PPO and HMO into the HSA, does it affect that 55,000? And I'd have to think it through some more. My initial reaction is it might reduce that number, but not by much, I don't believe. We've got about 80 teachers right now, either in the PPO or HMO, and we have somewhere around 250 that are in the HSA. So I'll have to noodle that around a little bit, do some math with it actually, and let you know if all the teachers came out of the PPO and HMO, went to the HSA, what would be the dollar impact of that. And while I have the floor, Mr. Slocum, I can answer your question about the prior contract. So the prior contract, which is, again, it's ending June 30th of this year, the increase amounts were and this is all in. So 2.44%, 3.1%, 3.2%, and 3.2%. So that's about 11.94%. And this contract, 4 years, is 10.11.
Okay. Thank you, Vin. That's helpful.
Ms. Pavano, do you have any other questions, or was your question answered satisfactorily? Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the council? I see a Board of Ed member, Chairman Perugini.
No, I just want to go back. Vincent and Jeff, what might be helpful for town council is when you produce a staffing report, can you also put into perspective the 6 versus 5 courses, why we still need the same number of teachers to, with declining enrollment, to deliver those other courses? There's a correlation there. I think that even publicly, the perception is if the enrollment's declining, then technically there should be less teachers at the high school, especially going from 6 courses to 5. But as Vincent and Jeff know, there's a correlation with number of students per course, at which point you can actually remove a teacher and still offer that course. This is important to know because in out years, when enrollment starts increasing at the high school, which could be several years out, you may need to add more staff to deliver all those courses that we're not offering from 6 to 5. So I'm not sure if you can put that in a chart form. I don't have it in front of me, but I know this came up during our deliberations. It might help.
To Tony's point, Tim Slocum, just a question. Does the contract allow that sort of a movement without a renegotiation to go from 5 to 6 classes? I mean, is there any change that would restrict that from happening, Tony, in this contract, if the need arose?
I think, well, I'm going to leave that to Jeff and Vincent. Because of the way this was negotiated and because there's so much emphasis to have a 3-year plan to go from 6 to 5, I would imagine there would have to be some kind of memorandum added to the contract if we ever had to increase that. But I don't believe there's anything contractually that ties us to that. Can't recall now, but
But you're accurate, Tony, because you can't, that's called impact bargaining. You can't just assign another class to teachers without having to negotiate that. So yes, you would be prohibited through impact bargaining. Statutorily, you can't just do that.
So this is a consequential change, basically. Should you have increased enrollment and you have to suddenly make some adjustments, you're into a hiring situation.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the students and class enrollment, but you know, on the downside, I mean, anything's unpredictable. Hopefully it's not going to be monumental. But the downside is we're already kind of cited by NEASC in the review of the school district that we have that 6th course. So it's kind of been hanging over the district for some time now. So with the enrollment being declining, now's the time to resolve this. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens if and when growth comes back to the high school, if we have to make any staffing adjustments. But yeah, we'd definitely plan that in advance.
Okay. Thank you, Tony, on that one for me.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum, Mr. Perugini. Any other questions or comments on the teachers' labor agreement from members of the council?
I did have one question. It didn't have to do with the salaries. It had to do with the teachers' reimbursements, for example, on educational achievement, you know, so that they can obviously do better, not only financially, but also in their education career with the students. It seems like you guys are going to dictate where they can get their classes. What does it actually mean? Did you eliminate the University of Phoenix? Is that sort of what you're talking about?
We eliminated options that really aren't accredited. You can nowadays find, quote, professional development courses that are maybe through an accredited university, but they offer these courses that are not applicable toward even their own degrees. They're frankly designed to provide means to racking up credits that will then allow you to get pay increases. And, you know, when I started to get emails from institutions that said, we have a flash sale on graduate credits, is somebody who worked for many years to earn several degrees, it wasn't just insulting, it was infuriating. And the union, I went to them, and to their credit, they immediately saw the problem with that. And we initially right away cut that out. And so we codified that in the contract language here.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, other questions or comments from members of the council? I don't see any. I have one quick question. Mr. Massiano, you mentioned earlier that the salary increases were generally below what you saw as average other deals being done, I guess, statewide or in like-kind communities. When you add in the deductibles, the healthcare reimbursements, put the 5 to 6 classroom issue aside, because I know that's a potential risk issue for us. But if you put that aside, but you look at the totality of all of the issues together, again, the deductible, the healthcare reimbursement, plus the salaries, what's your thoughts on that, comparatively speaking?
I think, I mean, as a general statement, it was a very fair package on both sides. And you know, there's no doubt that if you look at the 4-year teacher increase, us versus the settlements that we're seeing, you know, the teachers here in Cheshire are accepting a lower raise amount overall. And I think part of that is an offset for the high school 6 credits going down to 5. So I would say it's attractive for us, certainly. I think it was negotiated and then ultimately mediated fairly for us.
Okay, so just, I know you had given us a lot of data, and I thank you for that. There's a whole slew of other agreements that have been made from different communities, and I've gone through as many as I can. And you know, I'll be doing it a little bit more before next meeting when we take an action on this. But I just want to make sure that we're comfortable that, you know, I will tell you, you know, just generally, philosophically, for the times we're in, I'm concerned by these kinds of increases for anybody in this environment with the struggles that people are having right now. And I understand this is a 4-year contract and we're looking out into the future. So for me, I'm a little concerned about, what I think is maybe larger raises than I ideally think we should be providing in this moment. But nonetheless, I understand the risk of arbitration. We've won one when we've done it, but that doesn't mean we're going to win them all. I know you all have worked very hard, the Board of Ed alongside you all, to negotiate something that you think is mutually beneficial for our teachers, so that we show them that we respect them for the hard work that they do every day on behalf of our kids, but nonetheless understand the struggles of the everyday people in our community. And so, I just want to be darn comfortable that we're making a deal here that is satisfactory to everybody. And I think you just referenced that, Ben, that you felt this was a very amicable deal on both sides. Maybe you think everybody's giving a little bit, and at the end of the day, that's why it's good for both. And I still have a little more work to do with some of the information that you all sent us to make sure that I'm comfortable with that. But I certainly appreciate the fact that you've done a lot of work on this. I know almost every board member is here, maybe all of you from who I can see. I appreciate your hard work on this. And obviously you're all here because you care about this and it's important to you. So I guess at this point, I certainly want to open it up to the Board of Ed members. If any of you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to say, we'd certainly love to hear from you. Chairman Perugini?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Norris. I prefer to call you Rob. It's the official title. Too formal.
You could certainly call me Rob. I just want to make sure that I'm being respectful to everybody.
No, you are. And again, on behalf of myself and obviously the Board of Ed, thank you for having us tonight. I know these are not easy times. Even the best of times is never easy to contemplate these contracts. So thank you for giving a lot of thought. I know every town council always asks for a lot of supporting documentation, which you have. So if there's anything more you need, obviously let Jeff and Vincent or myself know. We'll get you what we can. For what it's worth, I wouldn't say every board member is completely happy with the contract. And there's some things that, we asked for, particularly year 4, we tried to get the number down a little bit. But the fact they gave in quite a bit in year 1 and worked with us, it's one of those things where you could both walk away, I guess, not 100% happy. It's probably a good deal. I can tell you, again, the details, the proposals going back and forth, there were a lot of things that were put on the table that just didn't make sense for Cheshire. So I guess, encourage you guys to talk with Jeff and Vincent about some of those things, because it's not so much about all what's in the contract, it's things that were not put into the contract that played a role in this. I will tell you that the union leadership, Mr. Redford and his team, were very cordial. They obviously understand the times we're in. And, the goal for the Board of Ed was to try to keep these increases reasonable in these times, try to keep the staffing levels as close as we can, because even though enrollment's dropping or starting to stagnate now, we don't want to dip too far below. So we were trying to save people, but also be fiscally responsible as best we can. I think we got there. But again, I just want to emphasize, for me personally, I think for some of the board members, it's been a while since boards have been trying to work out that 6 versus 5 course issue. I think now's the time to do it. It's going to benefit us all. So again, any questions you have, please let us know. Again, I know it's not an easy decision to make, but as always, we appreciate your thoroughness, and we're here to help if we whatever you need from us. So that being said, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Any other Board of Ed members? Yes, I see Mr. Grippo.
Thank you, Chairman Orris. So this was my first negotiation. I was on the negotiating team. I'd been chairman of the Finance Committee for, I believe, was it 2 years now? The number one factor is always position funding. For me, it was certainly my objective was to bend that cost curve down, knowing that, we were trying to work with staff with their 3.2% raise this current year. We're really trying to really hold that curve down. The first year isn't, perhaps quite as low as I would have liked, but considering the other settlements that had come in at the time that we were negotiating this during mediation. And it looks like even through today, or through the most current information we have, this negotiated contract is perhaps one of the most fair that I have seen in recent memory, at least in perhaps the 10 years that I've really been paying attention to the Board of Education budget. And I think that it's fair for the town because they gave and we gave a little bit. So and the main concern for me is, at least the way arbitration is explained, is that there's always that factor of need to pay. And I look at a town like Glastonbury, which I guess would be considered in our DERG, and a town that would have similar socioeconomic considerations, and their contract came in at 12.16 for their recent contract. And I believe theirs was a 4-year contract, and their first year I looked like it was over 3%, and we're at 1.75. I know we really wanted to hit 0 for this year with so much economic uncertainty, and that uncertainty certainly remains for at least one more year, if not 2, as we now have the hope of a vaccine rolling out, so that we can engage in a recovery. So I think this contract really holds the cost curve down through at least the first 3 years. Again, that 4th year still it bugs me a little bit too, as Chairman Perugini said. But I think that perhaps that was the cost of a fair negotiation, at least from my opinion. So I would strongly urge the council to at least to strongly consider accepting the contract that has been negotiated, as I'm not sure if arbitration would bear any better fruit than what we gained over this fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grippo. Any other comments, thoughts from members of the Board of Ed? Mr. White?
Thank you. Yeah, so I cannot take my council hat off when I'm thinking about the teachers' contracts. My old council hat. And I definitely have the taxpayers in mind. Some people are doing really well, and some people also are in, a pretty bad spot right now. More so than, in recent years, at least. I agree with the point. I believe it was Dave who made it, Dave Borowy, about sort of a hidden cost or an avoided cost going from the 6 to the 5 classes if enrollment increases. But I think in the end, on balance, it's a decent contract. I think that I don't think anybody is thrilled with it. I'm not, but I supported it, and I hope that the council does too. But if you don't, I mean, I get it. You have a different role to play here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. Any other Board of Ed members? Okay, seeing none. And again, I thank you all for taking the time to focus on the teachers' labor agreement. If we are not going to take action from the council perspective, we'll move on to the next item, if everybody's okay with that. Okay, so we'll move on to item 4, which is discussion regarding Board of Ed administrators' labor agreements. And I guess with that, Dr. Solon and Mr. Massiano, we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Orris. This is same process, same contract negotiations timelines as teachers have according to state statute. And so in this case, we were able to go through negotiations, and just prior to mediation, we're able to come to an agreement with the administrative bargaining unit. Frankly, there was very little change to contract language. So the administrators already for any educational work are required to submit that through central office, so that wasn't really an issue. So it really boiled down to brass tacks, which was the financial stuff, and of course our insurance too. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mr. Massiano, who can fill in the blanks there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Solon. I've asked Mr. Kimball if he could bring up the memo. Similar to the teachers, we constructed a similar memo showing the finances. So while Mr. Kimball's doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the medical benefits first. So the administrators have the same type of deal. It's an HSA plan at the core, and they could buy up to the PPO or HMO. The administrators, just let me back up a little bit. We've got 17 administrators, which this contract covers. And of the 17 administrators, there are 3 that are participating in either the PPO or HMO plan. So there was not much participation outside of the HSA. The HSA deductible is $2,000, $4,000, so $2,000 for individual, $4,000 for 2-person and family coverage. The administrators in the current contract are paying 11% to buy their coverage. In the proposed new contract, what we've negotiated, and this contract was negotiated, not mediated, the increase in co-share would go up. It's currently at 11. It'll stay 11% in year 1 of this contract. Then it goes up to 12.5%, and then it goes up to 14% in the 3rd year. So this is a 3-year agreement. The one thing that the administrators did agree to do is drop the PPO and HMO plan altogether in the 2nd year of the contract. So that's a good step. We would like for the other bargaining units to agree to drop the PPO and HMO plan. I know we finished talking about the teacher plan. The teachers were not agreeable to do that for this current contract, but we think that is a good step. In the long run, it should save us some of the administrative burden of managing 3 plans. I'm going to kind of back up to the top. Thank you, Mr. Kimball. So as you could see on the screen, and it's the same memo that was shared with the council and board members, this is a 3-year contract. The projected salary in the year 2021 is $2,597,357. So that's the budget value of the contract for the 17 administrators. So lower in the memo, which Sean, you don't have to scroll, the total dollar increase for one of the contract for wages alone is $44,672. Year 2 of the contract, that $2,662,578 represents an increase of $65,221. And then year 3 of the contract, that $2,733,646 represents a $71,000 increase to the overall budget and to the contract. On the right side of that second bullet, you could see it says with annuity, and it's a $6,000. The administrators have in their current contract a contribution towards essentially what is a retirement plan. It's a 403B form. We call it an annuity for short. So in this new contract, the dollar amount of that contribution goes from $5,000 to $6,000 per year. And it stays at $6,000 per year each of the 3 years in this contract. So that is part of their compensation. Again, it was $5,000 in this contract. It's been increased $1,000. The wage increases in the 3rd bullet, all in 1.75% in year 1, 1.3% is general wage increase, and only 0.45% is step. Of the 17 administrators in year 1 of the contract, there are 4 individuals who haven't reached the top step. This contract has 6 steps, so it is shorter than the teacher contract, just to be clear. Year 2 of the contract, 2.5% all in. Again, most of that is general wage increase. Year 3 is 2.65% all in. And by the time we get to the third year, 2.58% is GWI. There's only one person who isn't at top step in the last year of this contract. The other thing, which we're not going to show on the screen, but I'll just try and talk it through, is we have the same administrator contract settlement data from across the state. We did share that with the council members. So year 1, we're at 1.75%. The average across the settled contracts is 2.24%. So year 1, the administrator contract is lower than what we've seen on average. Year 2, we're at 2.5%. The average is 2.42. So we're a little above. Year 3, also, the average outside of us is 2.42. We're at 2.65%. So again, we're a little above. So the point is, all 3 years in this contract, we settle in a little bit below 2.5% per year on average. You know, the other point of information that I did want to share is our administrators, if you look across the DIRG-B, and again, I know we shared this with the council members. If you look at DIRG-B, which are the school districts that are essentially in the same socioeconomic category as Cheshire, our administrators are on the low end of DIRG-B, you know, at the high school level. And this contract includes our high school principal, our elementary principals and assistant principal, our director of pupil personnel. In all categories, you know, we are below the average in terms of pay. You know, we did have some trouble recruiting for the Darcy principal, you know, who agreed to come on, and she's excellent. But, you know, our pay was below where she was making. So we are trying to, in this contract, you know, make sure that we're remaining competitive within our DIRG with the salaries. Again, I think the salary increases are fair. They're certainly not enormous by any stretch of the imagination. You know, so I believe we've negotiated a fair contract. And the other piece of information I will share is that from the medical benefits side, you know, our administrators are benefiting from lower co-share rates than what we're seeing outside of our district. So we did, you know, certainly try to negotiate them up. And they are increasing to 14% in this contract. The only other thing that I didn't mention is the net reduction in the board's cost because of the increase in the co-shares for the HSA. In year 1, there is no change because they're at 11 and they're staying at 11. Year 2, the savings is $4,000, and in year 3, the savings is about $3,000. So you can subtract the $4,000 and the $3,000 from the wage increase costs that are quoted in this document. And I think that's the long and short of the overview on the financial side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massiana and Dr. Solon. Questions or comments from council members? Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Massiana, just quickly, reason for 3-year versus 4-year.
I wish I could tell you there's a scientific reason. It seemed to be the preference. This group had a 3-year agreement before. There really was not much interest in going out a 4th year in this contract. And in a sense, it helps us a little bit in that, you know, this year we had both the administrator and the teacher contract to negotiate in the same year during the same time period. So if this gets approved as submitted, we negotiate the administrators 3 years from the start of this contract and the teachers the following year. So we got a little bit of separation, which helps us on, just from an administrative point of view.
You referenced the DIRG B and how the administrator salaries were lower than most of the DIRG B. Is the annuity not factored into that, because it's not, you're just factoring in salary, but is it pretty across the board that every school system gives their admins annuity?
It's pretty commonplace, but the dollar amounts do vary district to district. And I don't know if Dr. Solon has some more information he could share. I know we did a survey. I don't believe, well, I know I don't have it in front of me this evening, but they do vary across the districts.
Yeah, they definitely do vary. It is definitely commonplace, as Vin said. 6,000 would be on the high end of those, but there are the others that are higher. There is pretty wide variance on that.
I guess my only point being that when when you look at strictly salary, it may be a little misleading that we're on the low side, but then if we're on the high side of annuity, that, there is an offset there that, may put us more in line.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we negotiate this, like we did with the teacher contract, it's in close consultation with our labor attorney, review of other contracts. And at the end of the day, this was considered to be nothing. They wanted more money. They're walking away unhappy in that regard. We're walking away a little unhappy. We would want less. And so, we think at the end of the day, this is a fair package. We look at all components for both teachers and administrators.
Right.
On that chart that you put together for us, that is incredibly helpful, by the way. So the financial summary and the impact of the Board of Ed budget, it's the 44,672 year one, 65,221, and then 71,068. That doesn't include the annuity, though, correct?
Correct. So 17,600 is what would be added on top of the 44,672, and it's 17,600 for each of those years.
Say that again.
It's $17,600 is the annual cost, the annual incremental cost of moving the annuity from 5,000 to 6,000. There are 18 administrators, but one of them is a 0.6. So they get 6/10 of the $1,000 as an increase.
Okay. All right, because I was looking at the full, at the full number, but you're right. It's incremental only because it's included already. So it's only incremental by the 1,000 between the difference between the 5 and the 6. Okay.
Correct.
And that's another reason why it's beneficial to include an annuity. It's toward a retirement for our leadership team, but it also, when salary percentage increases are layered on, that annuity is not impacted.
Right.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Mr. Talbot. I can't see the crowd. Okay. Any other questions? Ms. Nichols.
You're muted, Ms. Nichols.
Keeping my puppies quiet, sorry. I have a question about the HSA contribution levels. Having sat in on many negotiations and contracts, what's the average amount percentage that employees are required or asked to contribute to HSAs in other towns? Are we, when we get up to the 14%, level sort of even with other towns, or are we still far below? Because I think we were quite a few points below what other towns were requiring their contributions to be. Make sense?
Yeah, the administrators are on the low end for sure, even when they get to the 14%.
Okay.
So that's, that's definitely in their favor.
Mhm, okay. And how much are they going up in this? I lost that screen again and I lost my piece of paper here in front of me.
They're going from 11%
To 14.
up to 14.
Right, so about a percentage year, okay.
So yeah, they just didn't want to do it all in the first year because they took a lower raise in year one, 1.75. So we agreed that in the first year, it'll stay 11% like it is now. And then it goes up 1.5 and then another 1.5.
Yeah, that's fine. And is that when, I know we've gone past the teachers, but is that similar in the teachers' contract, or are their numbers substantially different there?
So the teachers, they're currently at 14. They're going to 15, 16, 17, 18. So they're going up 1% per year.
And is the general consensus that other towns get to 18 now? I mean, where are the other towns currently? Do we have any idea?
For the teachers?
Yeah, or for administrators, either one. Are they both still even, or are they way below?
The teachers are closer to the norm,
Okay.
but I think slightly below. The administrators are below.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. And we have in our packet a lot of these communities and their settlements, which include some of these healthcare reimbursements. And it is clear to me that certainly with the administrators, they are way on the low side of healthcare reimbursement. And certainly hearing what I heard about their retirement contribution, I think, Mr. Talbot, you raise a very relevant point that while salary is one barometer of where we measure ourselves compared to other DERG communities, I think the more relevant comparison is the total package. I would assume most people are looking at the total package and comparing that. So it seems like we're much more market driven when we do the total comparison than when we just take salary. So with that, any other questions or comments from members of the council? No, seeing none. And I think we're all, certainly thinking of the same kind of stuff that we are with the teachers, and we're all going to be doing some additional due diligence between now and our December 8th meeting. And I'm certainly hopeful we will take action at that meeting. That's my goal as chairman, that we will not just sit silent, that we will take an action one way or another. I think for me, it's important that the community understands where we stand as the fiscal concern of the community relative to all contracts. And so for me, it's important that we do make a statement one way or the other, and we not just say nothing about it and let it pass. So I'm hopeful we will have some very significant dialogue and a vote on this at the next meeting. Is there any comments that any of the Board of Ed members would like to make relative to this particular administrators agreement? Okay, I think we've said a lot on all this. Once again, I thank you all. I know you all have worked tirelessly on this staff. I know Dr. Solon and Mr. Massiano, you and your staff have worked really hard in a very difficult environment. And I know you've got so many other things on your plate relative to COVID that are just probably stressing you in so many places, including the Board of Ed. I know you guys are running in a lot of directions as well. So, I don't think we want to be a big distraction here. I think we all want to try to get through this as best we can. We want to be fair to all parties. As I said earlier, obviously we respect our teachers and all of our staff and the various union groups. But nonetheless, we need to be cognizant of the issues and concerns that the community is dealing with as well. And those are the balancing acts that we as a council have to face. And so, we'll continue to deliberate, work hard over the next week or so before December 8th, and we'll take it up at that meeting. So if there's nothing else on these Board of Ed issues, we'll move on to item 5, which is just really council material. And once again, thank you all from the Board of Ed and staff for being here tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Happy
Enjoy
Thanksgiving.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Same to you all.
So with that, we'll move on to number 5, discussion and possible action regarding legislative recommendations. I'll turn to Mr. Slocum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be it resolved, the town council approves resolution 112420-3. Be it resolved, the town council approves the legislative recommendations as recommended by the planning committee.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Mr. Slocum?
Thank you, Mr. Orris. The planning committee met just prior to this meeting. We had, as a committee and also as a full council, received in our packets sort of an amalgamation of different things we've done in the past and also some looking forward from the town manager, generally ranked into general legislative requests that sort of could benefit all the towns, and then some of those are very specific to Cheshire. What the committee did was we reviewed what the town manager had sort of summarized, and in the general legislative requests, what we didn't really discuss in great detail was, number one, concerns with the 2020 police accountability bill, and for that reason, we invited Chief Dreif tonight, and I'm simply going to ask the chief to be prepared to, speak to the full council on those specifics, but to do so after we've had a chance to go through the others that we put forward in our recommendations. And those being prevailing wage. Let me make sure I'm on the right page. Yep. Bear with me. Binding arbitration and the enabling legislation for community choice aggregation for energy. That particular one, number 5, I know in planning I had raised a question about that because I know that that came forward from the Energy Committee last year. And I quite honestly wasn't certain if anything had happened at all, what the deal was. But because of the shortened session, largely because of COVID, this never really had any consideration with the legislature. So we felt it was worthy of leaving it on there in light of the fact that it could certainly benefit some members of the community, and the legislature hadn't acted on it at all, but is expected to do so this year. So at any rate, we then went on to the Cheshire specific requests, and some of those that we were recommending to the full council for consideration are different than was submitted in our packets from the town manager's office. One that didn't change was the transfer of the school bus depot property from the state to the town of Cheshire. We did put in the municipal speed limit thing that was not there, and we did put in pedestrian crosswalk safety, which was not there. I think most of us felt it was significantly important that pedestrian safety is an issue for all of us in town. So this may be one way to, get there. Again, the legislature apparently didn't do anything on it in 2019, so we're not certain about that. And then finally, that's sort of where we kind of left that, other than the chief's conversation that we'll have with us tonight. So I didn't know if this would be the appropriate time to open up to the council, Mr. Chairman, conversations on at least what the planning committee recommended, minus the conversations and the recommendations of the chief regarding use of force, etc. Might be a good time.
I'm fine either way. Thank you, Mr. Slocum, for that. I know Chief Dreif is here. Maybe I think it might be more important to have Chief Dreif just give us his thoughts on certainly the item he's here to talk about first, and that might provoke some additional questions, and then we can go to the council. Are we okay with that?
I think that's fine. I know I thought it was very important the chief spoke to the whole group, not just planning. And thank you, Chief, for being here.
You bet. So there's actually two items. I think the juvenile justice law concerns are still there.
They're both here, yeah.
Yeah, let me just touch on that because I think that's a holdover from a previous year. Certainly, you're all aware from looking at the monthly reports that we send out that we're still having a significant issue with folks coming into town in the most often in the middle of the night and rummaging through unlocked cars, and when the opportunity presents itself, stealing those cars if the keys are also left in them. Our experience is that many of those crimes, and I don't have specific numbers to where I'm comfortable saying the majority of them, but certainly many of those crimes appear to be being committed by juveniles. And I know that there are certain members of the legislative delegation who are on one side of that issue, and others who are completely on the opposite side of it. I certainly think there are still concerns that there are zero consequences now for most juveniles involved in criminal activity compared to what there used to be. I read with interest, there was a story in the New Haven Register from just the other day where the police officer in New Haven rolled up on a car that was occupied by 3 juveniles who were fast asleep inside the car. Ran the license plate, car comes back stolen out of Hamden. The kids are locked in the car, so he waits for backup to get there, smashes the window out, unlocks the car. The kid in the back seat, who's 13 years old, pulls a gun on him. There's a little bit of a tense standoff there before the kid puts the gun down. All 3 are ultimately taken into custody. When they got the driver out of the car, he also had a firearm, and 2 out of the 3 of them had active arrest warrants for previous incidents that they were wanted for. There was a story in the Hartford Courant, I believe it was probably within the last week or 10 days, where a juvenile was arrested at about 8:30 p.m. Driving a stolen Volvo. He was taken into custody, taken to the police station, and then as state law dictates now, released on a juvenile summons to a guardian or other responsible person. So released, without being taken to a juvenile detention center. And just after midnight, the same juvenile was arrested driving a separate stolen car. So, in addition to that, there's myriad other stories about these, situations with, I think through September 30th, I believe it was, or I'm sorry, October 30th, the Hartford Police Department has recovered 1,025 cars this year that were stolen out of town. And again, our experience is, although it's somewhat anecdotal, I can't pinpoint, a lot of times these cars are recovered, but no arrest is made, right? The kids ride it around for a couple of days or a couple of hours or whatever, and then, it's just parked on the side of a road or dumped in a parking lot somewhere, and, the police find it and recover the vehicle, but no arrest is made. But certainly for cases where people are being arrested, a fair number of them appear to be juveniles. And again, you'll get advocates who will argue that there's no evidence to support the fact that the change in the law and the change in the consequences and penalties and what you can do with a juvenile when you arrest them. Bearing in mind, obviously, that in Connecticut, every stolen car is a felony. That there's no connection there's no evidence to support a connection, but certainly all of my colleagues in the police profession believe that there is a direct correlation between the lack of any immediate consequence, and it's only been exacerbated by the pandemic and the fact that the courts are closed. So now you're getting kids who are being arrested time and time again but their court cases are just pending. They've got 5, and in some cases 5 or 6 cases pending before juvenile court, but nobody's going to court because of the pandemic. So again, I would certainly be a supporter of the council expressing to the legislators that they would like that juvenile, the various changes that have been made in juvenile law over the last couple of years to be revisited. The more immediate, I think, concern, just because it's fresher in everybody's mind because it was just passed in the recent special session, is the police accountability bill. What I tried to do in my memo to you is take out the things that I'm most concerned about now, and they are really in order of what I consider to be importance. The use of force is now the number one concern, I think, of most of my colleagues. It's not slated. It's one of the sections of the bill that doesn't go into effect until July 1st of 2021. But you'll see that it creates a use of force standard in the state of Connecticut that is unique to the other United States in this country. We fear that it will lead to, it actually sets up this kind of second guessing situation without providing the men and women who actually go out onto the streets every day and actually do the job with any real direction. There's a lot of vague language in there about exhausting all de-escalation techniques and using alternative methods before you use force, particularly deadly force. And it requires that the people who are reviewing these critical incidents that oftentimes happen in split seconds in the middle of the night, often involving people who are in the middle of a mental health crisis or under the influence, or have just committed an act of violence against someone else. Did the police officer do anything to set in motion the events that led to the use of force? And the concern is that it's going to look at, I guess the theory is called in legal circles called officer created danger. But the way the bill is written right now, there's no real parameters for that. So police officers, in my opinion, they've expressed that they are hesitant and afraid that under certain circumstances, somebody's going to look and say, yeah, but if you didn't do this, then you wouldn't have put yourself in a position where the person was able to attack you with a knife and therefore you had to shoot them. One of the examples that I keep thinking of that keeps coming up is, well, you arrive at the scene of a domestic dispute and the suspect who's been described to you on the telephone runs out the front door and runs away. So, back when I was a young police officer, and hopefully today, any police officer worth their badge is going to chase the person down in an attempt to take them into custody. But what happens if at the conclusion of this foot pursuit, now the person again turns around and has a knife, and now the officer's in a situation where they feel that they're justified in using deadly force and shoots the person? Is the Inspector General, which is a new state position created for the purpose of investigating police use of deadly force, going to say, well, if you had waited for backup, for example, before you took off in pursuit of this person by yourself, you would not have found yourself in a position moments later where you had to use deadly force. De-escalation is another one. It's pretty much common knowledge that raising your voice and speaking loudly or yelling at somebody who is in the midst of a mental health crisis sometimes is not the best course of action. However, if that person is standing there with a knife or is involved, is physically assaulting someone, is an officer going to be considered to not have used the appropriate de-escalation techniques because they tried to, they yelled at the person? And again, these may seem like, far-fetched examples, except that they're really not. There's no definition as to what all these alternative means are, and who's going to be, who's going to be judging that. It's the old, every time there's a controversial shooting somewhere in this country, right, the media goes out, sticks a microphone in somebody's face, and it's all, well, I don't know why they didn't tase him, I don't know why they didn't hit him with their batons, I don't know why they didn't shoot him in the leg, these types of arguments that are made. And again, I think the police officers are justifiably worried or concerned that they're going to be judged in hindsight, right? There's a famous Supreme Court case that says police officers' actions shouldn't be judged with the 20/20 vision of hindsight, and because they face rapidly evolving situations. And I can't quote the whole case to you, but it seems like we're setting up a situation now where that is exactly what's going to happen in the state of Connecticut. The qualified immunity, which is the second point that I made there, there's a lot of backtracking on that, and the people who proposed, I think most telling is the people who have proposed the change in qualified immunity are now falling all over themselves to say that it really doesn't change anything. But every legal analysis I've seen by people who represent police officers or municipalities in police defense cases say that there is in fact a new cause of action against police officers. Again, they're concerned about that. And then, unfortunately, there was an article circulated probably last week by the Police Chiefs Association's lobbyist that quoted Representative Staffstrom, who co-sponsored co-sponsored the bill, I believe. And one of the things that he is quoted directly in there is saying that there will be no going back to look at the consent search law. So that was, as you notice, my third bullet there. Basically, Connecticut's legislature has said that you cannot use consent to search. You can't even ask. If you stop a car for a motor vehicle violation only, you cannot ask the driver of that car for consent to search the car. And if you are stopping a pedestrian or somebody who's not in a vehicle, basically consent, even if they give it to you, really is not considered a reason for a police officer to search that person anymore. As I took some pains to note there, the Chief State's Attorney's Office put out what they called some guidance. It's 10 pages written to try to explain to police officers what the change in the consent search means to them, and how the Chief State's Attorney's Office feels that it will be, or that it should be interpreted by police officers. But at the very end is kind of the catch-all paragraph that says, this is just our essentially best educated guess on what this means. But until there starts being cases presented in court in relation to arrests and searches of people and vehicles, and judges have a chance to weigh it and get back to us and say, you know what, I feel that was a good case even under the new statute, or I feel that was, you asked for consent, or your actions indicated consent or something like that. What they're saying is, in spite of the 10-page memo that they put out, they really don't know if that's how the courts are going to interpret it. And for those of you, familiar with how that process will work, if a judge in a local court throws out a piece of evidence because he feels it was an improper search, if the prosecutors are so inclined, they can go to the Connecticut appellate court to try to get that, to try to get a different judgment on that, or a different ruling. but we're talking about something that could take years before there's really starts to be an established, you know, legal set of cases that police can look to and say, okay, this is how it's actually being interpreted in the state. So you can imagine that a 10-page memo for the change in consent law, I don't know how many pages it's going to take to try to explain to officers what the new use of force parameters are going to be, and what constitutes de-escalation, and what constitutes alternative means, and what constitutes exhausting other options, and all of that stuff. I think it's just a recipe for just complete and total confusion on everybody's part. Again, to the extent that we are a safe suburban community, maybe we don't deal with these things as often as some of our colleagues will in the larger cities, but I think I may have shared it with some of the council at another meeting. I can't imagine what it would be like to still be working in Hartford and dealing with with like a proactive street crimes unit, for example, who were expecting to go out and arrest people who are in stolen cars, or who are shooting people or carrying guns and things like that under these circumstances, because I don't know how I, with a clear conscience could, when they come back to me and say, well, if we jump out of the car and try to catch this guy and he runs away, I'm not sure what we should do. And, I'm not sure that I'd have an answer that satisfied them either. So again, as a profession, we remain deeply concerned, and the Police Chiefs Association is still trying to work on some of this stuff. But as I'm sure all of you know, the way the election here turned out, it got, I don't know that anybody on the Police Chiefs Association or Board of Directors or our lobbyist is really holding out a lot of hope that there's going to be a groundswell of support among the legislature to go and change some of this stuff. But certainly I would appreciate if we could make it clear to our legislators that we have concerns about this. I think I copied the members of the council on the letter that I ended up sending to Sansom, Leslie Zupkus, Mrs. Linehan, and Mr. Fishbein and Mrs. Abrams. Some of them didn't respond to me at all, and some of them were obviously supportive and voted against the bill, but others did not. And I think you'll probably find the same thing, but certainly going on the record with it would be appreciated.
Thanks very much, Chief, for the detailed overview. This is obviously important. It certainly is to me. It's on our list. It's certainly number one on our list here, not because it's the most important item, but it's certainly very important to me that we get this right. And so I'm certainly going to support that one. And at this point, getting back to what Mr. Slocum was talking about earlier, let's get this open to some questions and some comments from members of the council. As we all know, we haven't had a lot of opportunity to kind of deliberate this amongst us all. We did see a draft, which was sent out by Sean. And then in the planning meeting, which occurred just before this meeting, there were some minor changes, a swapping of items 7 and 8. So I want to make sure that, I know Mr. Slocum was clear about that, but I want to make sure all members of the council understand those changes and have an opportunity to talk about any and all of these items and determine whether we're ready to advance this with a vote or not. So with that, I'll open it up for questions or comments from the council.
Mr. Orris, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Mr.
if I could just make a supportive, a fulsome support of what the chief expressed, and also take the public opportunity to chastise members of our legislative group that represent the town of Cheshire that were in support of this. I'm offended, insulted, and outraged. And I think they have to look at a larger picture. When a gunman can shoot back at the cops, possibly without consequence, or a cop can get killed because he's second guessing the right decision that might have to be made, is absolutely repugnant to me. And for this reason, I will join the chief and anyone else up at the legislature and scream to the highest ear that'll hear me. I just wanted to state that for the record because I'm angered by a lot of the crap that's gone on about law enforcement in the entire country. And when it gets down to our little communities where we live and count upon the police to do what they are rightly trained and asked to do, and there's not a resident of any town that is not going to first call the police when they're in trouble or when their car is being stolen or whatever, and suddenly a responder has to worry about what they're supposed to do. I just don't think it's right. And I think probably most here share my opinion, but I got a little strident and I do apologize. But I'm not sorry for how I feel. And I think we need to reverse this as soon as possible. The only other question I had of the chief, because it had to do with the change that you noticed, Mr. Orris, regarding the speed limit aspect of that. In introducing that back into one of the requests, I saw that as an opportunity for the towns to have a little more control over certain things, that the state has control. I may have been misinformed on that. My question lay here. If we have speed limits of 25 miles an hour on a mountain road and some of our other well-trafficked roads, that's predicated on your decision as traffic control chief or a state requirement that you have to meet? Do you have an answer for that, chief, that would clarify that for me?
For the most part on local roads, I do have some authority as the traffic authority to designate the speed limits. I'm not 100% up to speed on what this act actually calls for. 25 miles an hour is kind of a floor. And I think the way the synopsis is written up here, it says the bill would allow Cheshire to lower speed limits on our town roads if we chose to do so. I think 25 is a floor, and going below that on just a regular local road, I don't think I can do. I'd have to get back to you on that specifically.
So I guess my question to myself would be, upon having suggested that change, was maybe a misunderstanding of what that meant. I thought you had to ask the state if you're 25, if Mountain Road was 25, as opposed to you being able to make that, rational decision. I couldn't see justifying it going to 15 miles an hour, though. And I guess if that's a distinction and a difference, I guess I need to know that before I would accept that change.
I suspect, Mr. Slocum, that some of these might have been where, maybe where a road was, 35 or 40, and people wanted to lower it, downward from there. But again, I confess I'm not 100% familiar with the bill, and I'd have to get back to you on that before I made a recommendation to you on that one.
Well, it would have to be a different.
Can I make a quick clarification?
Finish up and
Sorry, can I make a quick clarification or try and add?
Mr. Jenks, go
Okay,
ahead.
thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the this legislation has to do so that the 25 mile an hour speed limit is the state mandated minimum speed limit, or I guess maximum for some roads for towns around the state. So that's the lowest allowable speed limit that the state the state allows towns to have on their roads without some sort of special waiver. So this legislation has to do with giving towns the opportunity to lower a speed limit on a road if they so choose to do, and if the conditions were established on that road that the town wanted to lower a speed limit. It's not to allow the town to lower the speed limits on all their roads necessarily, and the town wouldn't necessarily want to do that, but there may be certain conditions or certain scenarios in town in some places where we might want to lower a speed limit below 25 miles an hour. That's what it would allow us to do. I think the minimum then is maybe 15. I don't think we'd be allowed to lower below that. But, one example I can think of is Peck Lane or Peck Road, for example, where at one end of Peck Lane, closer to Jarvis, it's a pretty wide road, and 25 miles an hour is a good speed limit there, or a reasonable speed limit there. But as you get closer to West Main or Waterbury, Meriden, whatever it is at that point, it's a much narrower road. It's more of a neighborhood road where 25 is actually pretty fast in that situation, that neighborhood. So there are places around town where at least it would be good to have the option, I think, as a community to be able to look at lowering speed limits as one way to calm traffic in some streets.
Dave, if I could just jump in quick, Dave, because I
Yep,
just
go ahead,
want to
please.
follow up
Yep.
on Mr. Slocum. I too was a bit confused on what this exactly was, and thank you, Mr. Jenks, for clarifying it. And I can tell you, I am very supportive of any opportunity to slow traffic down, to make our streets safer for our community. I think that's something we struggle with every day. I am concerned about the practicality of this and the energy to go through to get it, and whether it actually is going to pay dividends. We use Mountain Road as an example. It's a 25-mile-an-hour zone. If we could get people to go 25 miles an hour on Mountain Road, I think we'd be thrilled, and I think that's probably a safe speed. Nobody goes 25 on Mountain Road. I live near it. I have a family member that lives right on Mountain Road. They fly down that road. So I think our issue personally is not finding ways to lower our posted speed limits. It's to find ways to get people to adhere to the posted speed limits. And I think that's really the big issue. And I'm concerned that this doesn't do any of that. So that's the distinction that I see. And again, I'm not trying to be critical of anyone who's supporting this. I get what we're trying to do here. It's all about safety, and I'm all for it. But practically, I just don't know that it does what we need it to do, because we have speed limits already in many, many roads that if people just listen to them, we'd be okay. But they fly down these roads, whether it's Jarvis or Mountain Road, well in advance of the already posted speed limits. And that's really the bigger issue. And I'd rather focus our attention on how we get that to stop versus just putting a sign up that says, well, go slower, when no one even adheres to it. So that's kind of my overall concern about this particular one issue. So anyway, I guess we'll go Dave Belliver.
Good, thank you. And I think Chief, you had talked about this maybe when this came up last time or something. And I guess my question would be, I agree. I see the flexibility and the safety part of it, but similar to what Rob was talking about, Chief, is this a situation where lowering the speed limit may actually make things more dangerous, where you may actually see more drivers do more crazy things to get around people who are actually doing the speed limit, where you're creating a bigger gap between the practical speed limit, that is the speed that people feel comfortable driving, versus the actual speed limit? And is there situations where the bigger that gap is, the more likely you are to actually have accidents and problems arise between drivers?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a concern, right? I mean, 15 miles an hour, like if you've ever driven 15 miles an hour, like through a parking lot, it's pretty slow. And I think, yeah, there's always that concern that if you come, like as some of you I think have shared in the past, certainly I know that some of the community members who've contacted me, particularly about Mountain Road, for example, I've had people email me or call me on the phone and tell me that they were doing 25 or 30 on Mountain Road, and people passed them because their perception is that, I don't know what it was. Maybe they were lost and looking for an address or something like that. But, certainly I think, lowering a speed limit below below 25, which, again, I agree. There are some situations, I think, school zones and things like that, where you can set up the, hey, 15 miles an hour when lights are flashing kind of a thing. That certainly would be a concern, as Mr. Orris pointed out. You can't get people to do 25. I don't know that putting up a sign that says 15 on it is going to make them go really any slower. One of the things we've talked about a couple of times over the last, decade is the need, in my opinion, for a townwide traffic study at some point. One of the concerns that I have in speaking to some of the folks who, the traffic engineers and the like from the DOT, is that some of our roads are more appropriate for a higher speed limit rather than a lower one, based on, it's called the 85th percentile speed, right? The speed at which 85% of the cars drive down the road. And one of them, for example, Mountain Road. If a traffic engineer was looking at Mountain Road and based on accident history and sight lines and intersecting streets and all of that, they would come up with 35 as the appropriate speed limit for Mountain Road. Cheshire Street is another one where I get a lot of complaints about speeding cars and people passing me and things like that. Where again, the speed limit there is probably artificially low. So, I can see both sides of it. As far as a local road in Cheshire, even one, as Mr. Jinks suggested, like, there are parts of Peck Lane out by West Johnson that, there's farmland and things on both sides and not that many houses. And then as you get closer to the Waterbury Road or West Main Street, it does get much more congested. But even there, I think based on the width of the road and everything like that, I think we'd be hard pressed to make an argument based on volume and things like that the speed limit should be less than 25 miles an hour. But certainly, if all this does is give us the option to do that, I don't see the harm in that. But again, I agree. It's difficult to imagine that simply changing the speed limit sign from 25 to 15 would have a significant impact on the driving behavior. People that, the theory of it is that people drive at a speed that they're comfortable with. I can see down the road, the sight lines are good, the road is in good shape. And I'm comfortable doing 35 miles an hour on this road. And now look, there's always somebody who's going to go down it at 55. But that's kind of one of the theories behind setting speed limits is taking a speed measurement and kind of setting the speed limit close to the 85th percentile speed, meaning 85% of the cars are going at that approximately that speed or lower, something like that. So yeah, look, it's nice to have tools in the toolbox. And if that's what this legislation would provide us, I certainly wouldn't say no. Then it would, then in spite of the fact that then I'd be probably getting requests from people to lower speed limits on a whole bunch of streets and have to research it and get back to them and tell them why I don't think it's a good idea or appropriate for whatever street they're referencing. But again, it's nice to have options. It's better to have the ability to do it than just simply have to tell people, I'm sorry, I can't put the speed limit below 25. I don't have the authority. So.
Thank you, Chief, for that feedback. That's very informative. I appreciate it.
Other questions, comments on either this or others? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, thank you, Chief, for that. And I agree with Mr. Slocum about I'm very disappointed with our own state legislators for passing that police accountability law. And I'm hoping that in this legislation session that they will look at it again and take out some of the things that could put our police in danger. the question I had, and it's kind of a chief, the pedestrian crosswalk safety. And I know that the law is that, the cars have to stop once their foot is in the crosswalk. Do you feel that if the law is that if they're standing by the crosswalk, that could cause accidents or could cause traffic? Or because I do know that there are some places where there are bus stops where the crosswalks are. So if somebody's waiting for a bus and happens to be near the crosswalk, somebody's going to say, oh, maybe I need to stop here. I'm just wondering what your feelings are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the way the crosswalk statute is written right now causes some confusion, in that, I've certainly, earlier in my tenure, I had a big argument with a guy from the West Main Street area, talking about, his take on it was that his understanding of the law was that if somebody was presented themselves at the crosswalk, even though they were still standing on the sidewalk, that vehicles should then stop. Now, many people do, as I'm sure you've seen, many people do as a courtesy, but the law only requires that you yield to somebody who's actually in the crosswalk. So I think there is some confusion around that. And look, I think it's like many other things. If somebody's standing on the sidewalk and the car in front of you yields to it and you're in a hurry, you might say, well, they're not required to stop here. I'm just going to go around them. That conceivably that could happen, in much the same way that Mr. Veliber was suggesting with a slower moving car. But again, I don't think most people are not scofflaws, right? Most people try to do the right thing and will stop and yield to pedestrians and the like. I'm not sure, that I would be overly concerned about that. It would, like everything else, it'll take people a little bit of time to get used to the change in the statute if there was one. But sure, I think it could be. You'd have to make sure that that the crosswalks were positioned in such a way that not every car driving down the street looks, oh my God, there's somebody waiting to cross, I have to stop now. And it turns out the person's, waiting for somebody who's in a store, or like you said, your example, waiting at a bus stop.
Right. Well, I think also, especially at the linear park crosswalks, I always seem to slow down and yield at those stops anyway. And I think, there's a lot of people who do that, but there are a lot of people who don't. And that could be a danger. I know that's why at West Main, we had put, what was that called? The
Hawk.
Yeah, the Hawk, and the other thing to slow people down who might just go right through
Chicanes?
it. Yeah, chicanes. Yeah. So I understand that. All right. Well, I appreciate that answer. I had a question about one other thing on our list, or two things. It seems like in the past we've been brought up with the legislature, prevailing wage and binding arbitration, and it seems like those are things on the agenda every year, and we don't seem to be getting any response from them or getting anywhere on that. Is it worth even? I guess we could keep hounding them on it, but I'm not sure if we're getting any answers from them.
Well, Donna, I guess I can try to answer that as best I can as someone that's been around a little longer, and I know there's others here that have been longer than me. I look at these as issues that are really important to us, and whether we're getting headway or not with them, I think if they're critically important to us as a community and a group, we ought to keep pushing them. And personally, I think, the binding arbitration, that's one, I think it's a nice to have, but at the end of the day, it's not, to me, that critical. But the prevailing wage one, to me, is something that really is a dollars and cents issue. And even though we haven't been super successful with it, I think it's something we need to continue to push. So, I'm certainly personally supportive of both of these, because I think if we do eventually make some headway, they're big benefits for us. But I get it. I'm not sure we could really look at many of these things. Probably, Tim, you and Sylvia have been around a long time. How many of these have we actually been that successful with? I'm not sure how much, but we have to keep trying. And that's why my goal this year was, I felt like we got a little crazy last year, which we had so many items on the list that it kind of waters down maybe the importance of everything. And my goal this year as chairman was to try to get us to kind of minimize the list, make it the most important items to the community so that we can really focus our attention and hopefully get our legislators to focus their attention on 2, 3, 4, 5 really important items to the town of Cheshire. Maybe that's a way we'd be more successful. And I still think we have too many things. I have some concerns about the practicality. I think everything on here is good. It's a nice to have. I'm not sure I agree with the practicality of some of the items on here. And I think in the end, what they do is they take up space and work against figuring out what's most important for the legislature. So for me, I'm struggling still with this list a little bit. And so, that's kind of my thoughts, Don. And, we may all have different thoughts about it, but that's kind of my 2 cents for whatever.
No, I understand. I guess it's just frustrating because I've seen, even before I was a councilman, I've seen where these have been brought up each time and they said, oh, we're going to work hard on it. We're going to work hard on it. And, a year later, we're back at it again saying, and they're going to say, we're going to work hard on it. We're going to work hard on it. And I think we have to get across, and they need to start fighting for us and not worry about what everybody else is saying. This is what is important to our community that you represent.
But that's why I think we have a better shot of it, Don, if we have less, I don't want to say more important items, but if we can agree on the most important items, make them fewer, it really gives them less opportunity to say, well, we got so many items, we don't know where to focus. So, I personally think it's a better tactic, and that's what I've been pushing for. And I still think the list is a little large.
I agree with that.
For my liking. Not that, again, I don't support everything, but I just think from a priority perspective, we'd be more effective with a smaller list.
Okay.
Mr. Jinks?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to say what I'm going to say, not because of a couple items on the list are being talked of as being pulled off. My approach or my thought on this in the planning committee, we had 15 items last year. We're down to 8. Over the course of a legislative session, our legislative members are coming across a lot of different issues, a lot of different things that are probably going to be of concern to us. So I understand the concern, or I understand the approach to get it down to a few items and have them really focus on those. I just feel like if we do that, we also perhaps, our legislative members maybe are not necessarily on the lookout for all the things that concern us. I know we, there's a balance that we need to strike, but, so whether it's a few more or a few less, I don't know. I do, we are quite a bit less number of items this year than we were last year. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jinks. Other questions, comments from members of the council?
I had a comment, if I may, unless someone is new and wants to come before me. I know I've spoken a couple times.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Mr. Slocum.
Okay, mine was this with respect to particularly prevailing wage and prevailing wage in particular, that really does have an impact on us. And we really need to, if we could press that. I mean, we do plenty of projects, guys, that cost under $100,000, and to be able to do a renovation project not subject to prevailing wage could be very helpful for the town. So I think while it may not have the legs to stand on, because as a Republican in the state of Connecticut, you're in a minority, it's not going to stop me from fighting for some of this stuff or advocating that a fight be made on its behalf. And the same holds true for the issue of binding arbitration. Again, this is not a request that there be no binding arbitration. It simply requests that it be done in a rational time frame. And it cites an example in which, I would advocate or state that the town was greatly harmed, that it took 23 months to resolve a police contract. That wasn't good for the cops, wasn't good for the town. So to me, that's why you leave the stuff there, not because it has a chance of passing, But someone out there knows that we give a damn that at least if it passed, it might help some of us. And that's why I think those items need to stay, even if they've been boilerplate for the last decade. That's just my opinion on the matter, Don, and maybe addresses the repetitive nature of some of these things that come up.
I appreciate
Thank
that, and I wasn't
No, no, no.
saying to
And
take them off, but I just think that you know, I'm as frustrated as you are with that they're not going anywhere, and we keep
Right.
bringing it up, and I'm wondering, are they listening to us?
Well, we
Well,
gotta keep
the facts of the
screaming.
matter is somebody else or some other organization has more power over the legislature than we do.
Right,
And
right.
maybe unions, maybe a lot of things, but that's probably what some of these issues boil down to. I see Ms. Nichols raising her hand.
Okay, I'm listening to all of this because I've sat through these sessions now for a lot of years, and I agree there's some that are repetitive. I agree that it's time that they stay on there. But what I'd like you to tell me is, after all this conversation, what exactly have we decided? What are the ones that you're actually proposing as the planning committee? Help me again you took some off and you're adding, you want to add some on. So we're, in my opinion, the police accountability bill is the one that we should lobby the loudest and hardest about at the moment. The juvenile justice reform is hand in hand with that. Prevailing wage is another one that critically it will involve our financial position in town. Binding arbitration, I agree with Rob. I think it's important. I think it's absurd that it takes more than 6 months to get these things gone through, but probably in the list of those, that's the lesser concern at this point. Now, enabling legislation for community choice, is that still on our list?
Yeah, it's still on the list. And just to clarify, Sylvia, the only changes from the draft that came from Sean and what came out of planning are changes from numbers 7 and 8, which were Cheshire specific requests, which initially they had upgrading Route 68 and 70 and
Right.
Connecticut Rail Express Shuttle.
And
Those two were removed by planning and inserted the municipal speed limits and the pedestrian crosswalk safety issues. Those are the only changes.
All right, so that's because I think that was, I just wanted to make sure that I was up to speed on that. As far as the speed limit thing, I think I am basically a person who supports less legislation than more. And I think that is legislation that could be passed. And as Chief says, it's not going to harm, but I don't really see the value in that as being one of the things we should devote a lot of time to. I don't know anything about the crosswalk issue, really. I haven't researched that. But otherwise, the first 5 are absolutely important and should be followed completely. I don't disagree with that. So,
Rob, I think it's a good idea to just, if we want to eliminate a handful of these, I have no objection. Planning advances something based on what we discussed as 3. And I think we don't have to wait until the next meeting. If there's an item or 2 that makes no sense here to the majority of us, let's just get it done so this can go forward.
Well, I have my personal thoughts on a couple of them, but I don't want to be too presumptuous, and I want to make sure that the group has an ample opportunity to think about, discover whatever they think they need to discover about these items, and we all make a decision that we think is in the best interest of the town. So I am completely comfortable if there's enough people that want to vote for it the way it is, make a modification to it, or potentially take a little more time to the December 8 meeting. I hate to kick the can, but if we want to deliberate some of these items a little bit longer, we can certainly do that as well. I don't think the extra, week and a half is going to make a big difference on these legislative recommendations. Correct, Sean?
No, it's not. December 8th is still in line with our plan.
Okay.
But I would like confirmation because we do have kind of pending invitations to the legislators. We haven't sent those yet just to make sure we're on track. But if the council's good inviting them to the December 15th meeting, we do want to send them this list in advance. But I think from the 8th meeting to the 15th, that's enough time in advance if you approve them at that meeting. So just to stay on schedule.
I think it's plenty of time, but again, I kind of throw it out to the group here, what your pleasure is as a majority, if you'd rather just kind of slice and dice it now, or do you want to just take a little more time to deliberate on it? in fairness, I have some questions on a couple of these items, but, and quite frankly, I don't see the practicality of the municipal speed limit issue. And I don't know if the pedestrian crosswalk practically is something that I'm in favor of either, because I think it's a double-edged sword potentially. Again, if I thought it would really create safety, then I'm all for it, but I'm not sure they do practically. But I don't know that I have enough information, and maybe others. I know Mr. Jinks has more information on this. I'd be more than happy to have a dialogue about this with all of you to think more about it. So, I'm trying to be as open and honest and collaborative as I can be on this. So I'm kind of throwing it out there to the group.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I agree with you. And I think one of the interesting things is, I had looked at the two, I agree that the five items, especially the first four, I think we're probably all going to agree on as being good and something there. I'm also fine with keeping the enabling legislation for the choice aggregation. That was probably something that was sort of unfortunately shelved with COVID in the last session, and maybe something that ultimately could be something that, if this ends up being a full legislative session, something that might be able to be hashed out and might ultimately be good for the town. And I definitely think number 6 is good. I have some, I think there's sort of 4 Cheshire specific items out there. The 2 original ones that came with the original memo, and then these 2 that are now being proposed. And so I think there's sort of 4 ones out there. I think we probably could kick them around a little bit and maybe add 1 or 2 of them in. And the question is, which of those are the best ones to put forward as something that we are going to helpful be for the town. And I think it's probably something that we probably could all talk about. But I think there's enough time between the December 8th meeting and the 15th meeting for them to pick up on, for them to get, what we're talking about and be ready for that meeting. So, obviously, if people want to talk about it now, that's fine. But I think ultimately, of these 4 Cheshire specific ones, I think we probably can get down to 1 or 2 of them, and it's just a matter of which of that group do we want to include in the, in the package.
Well, thanks, Dave. And I think this is good conversation, because I think it's important for the public to see the kinds of things that we do deliberate and talk about. So, having this kind of conversation in the open forum is good. I agree. I still, the upgrading of Route 68 and 70, and I know that was an issue that the state deemed a bike route. Now, whether there's any state money to do any of this or not, I don't know. I suspect there probably isn't. But for me, and I think many of us, the West Main corridor is becoming a real critical place for us to look at some development there. I think a lot of us think it's the one location that we could create a nice Main Street environment. We obviously have the linear trail and bike trails going through there. I don't know how real this is, but to me, out of the 4 that are up for discussion, the 7 and 8s, if you will, there's 4 of those that kind of we've interchanged. I would love to know a little more about the upgrading of Route 68 and 70, because for me, that could be an economic development driver in addition to a safety issue and creating things more pedestrian friendly in an area that we are highly focused on. So I would love to know a little bit more about that. I wasn't so quick to want to remove that. And I know, maybe the funding's not there for it, but, it could be important to Cheshire. And, the Connecticut Rail Express as well, we do have a traffic issue. I don't know enough about this myself, but if we can help get people to have transportation that they don't currently have to get back and forth to work, and if it does alleviate traffic, that's something I would consider and like to hear more about as well. So for me, if you're all okay with it, I wouldn't mind a little more time to kind of kick these 4, 7, and 8 ones around and see what we come up with, if you're okay with that.
Yes, I agree.
Sandy?
I think we need more time on this.
Well, actually, just to keep it simple, I think we could deep 6 all 4. That's just me. I don't see where the state's going to pay for a shuttle bus. Where are you going to fit bikers and signage on West Main Street, or put up the good fight to do it? I think we could spend money and put up those chicanes, real ones, That's a budget issue for the town of Cheshire. I think that's a safety issue that stops people in the crosswalk and
Big time
probably
safety
addresses
issue.
that without having enabling a legislation. And quite frankly, I'm satisfied that the speed limits at a 25-mile-an-hour low threshold is probably sufficient. And people go 35 and the cops won't stop us anyway. That's fine too.
Okay,
Not
so
that
I'm
the
gonna,
chief
then
telegraphed
I'm
that.
gonna throw out there, I'll entertain a motion to either just, kind of kick this can for another week and a half till the next meeting for further deliberation, or someone can put a motion on the table. Mr. Bowery,
Mr. Chair, I move that this item be tabled to the December 8th meeting.
I second that.
okay, Mr. Bowery, thank you. Ms. Pavano, any discussion on this matter?
No discussion.
Okay, call for a vote, all in favor? Looks, I think it's unanimous. I didn't see everybody. Peter, I see you. Jim, you okay with that?
Yep.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, it looks like it's unanimous. So, and I think, what I'll try to do is I'll try to reach out to everybody individually and try to have a conversation to see what's most important to everybody and what your perspectives are. And hopefully we can come to a final conclusion that we're all comfortable with. So I appreciate that collaboration. Thank you. So we'll move on to number 60. It was originally notification of Industrial Ave Bridge culvert repair, but I think it's now a discussion and possible action, correct, Sean?
That's correct. I know Director Nawatney is, I believe, lurking here. There he
Yeah,
is.
so we're going to go, and I think, Mr. Slocum, you're going to handle this resolution, and then we'll ask Mr. Nawatney to give us some background on this.
Perfect. Be it resolved, the town council approves resolution 112420-6. Be it resolved, the town council authorizes an application for DOT local bridge program 50% matching grant to replace the existing culvert under Industrial Avenue with a new box culvert.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Is there a second? Mr. Talbot, was that a? Yeah, thank you. I thought I saw a hand go up. Thanks, Mr. Talbot. Back to you, Mr. Slocum or Mr. Nawatney.
Well, I think Mr. Colbert would be helpful here, but I get the gist of the whole thing. It's evolved into a thing that sounds a little more positive than the last message, but maybe George, you can make that perfectly clear.
Sure. Well, thanks for the forum tonight. I'll try to be brief, which is always a challenge. And I'll start off by saying I apologize for the flurry of information and kind of the last minute recommendation change and everything else that you've seen. We were a bit surprised that this culvert was going to fit into the local bridge program to begin with. So that was a little bit of a shock to us, a pleasant shock, I should say. And then the fact that the application deadlines have changed with COVID this year, and we were pleasantly surprised there too that we can sneak this in under the November 30th deadline if the council agrees that they wish to pursue this. I'll take you through a quick background. I know you've read probably my memo and there's a lot there to digest, but basically the culvert's located on the 90-degree corner of Industrial Avenue. In that vicinity, it's two 48-inch steel pipes with concrete head walls and tail walls. So it's pretty standard culvert for Cheshire. We don't know the age of it, but it's got to be pushing 40 years, I would guess, just by the look of it. The culvert itself didn't show a lot of signs of deterioration. The state had inspected it many years ago and rated it as passable. And then we inspected it before the Industrial Avenue reconstruction project, and it shows its age, but it was serviceable, certainly. And we plan to reuse it when we reconstructed Industrial Avenue next year. This fall, we did a little more in-depth investigation as the referendum came through, and it showed marked deterioration. There's cracks in the head and the tail walls that the concrete is shifting as it goes a little bit. So it's not in imminent danger of collapse or anything like that, but it's certainly degrading at a faster rate than we anticipated. So here we are. The good news is that the actual pipes that carry the old canal under it are in pretty good shape. They're not rotted out at this point or in any danger of collapse that we can see. It's mostly the the concrete structure on either side of the road. So the bad news is we have this issue. Obviously, the good news is that we can isolate it from the reconstruction work on Industrial Avenue and get it replaced at about 50 cents on the dollar if everything works out, which is always a good discount. As everybody knows, the voters approved $620,000 a referendum recently to reconstruct Industrial Avenue, and that doesn't necessarily have to stop that reconstruction work. This culvert can be isolated from that. So the grant application is due November 30th. We're prepared to submit it with the council's approval, obviously, and the general schedule is design and permitting would occur in 2021, and the construction would occur in 2022 if everything works out. So that'd be our plan. And then in the interim, subject to any changes of the use of Industrial Avenue, we would plan to do the reconstruction of Industrial Avenue next year sometime at a time that's convenient for all the businesses out there that use it for their trucking and other uses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nowotny. Mr. Slocum, anything you'd like to add?
Only a thank you, George. That was a very concise explanation.
It was. Questions or comments from members of the council? Seeing none. George, I have one quick question for you, really for the public's edification. Obviously, we just had a referendum approval for Industrial Ave. This was not included in that. And I just want to underscore to the public that at the time, the bridge or the culvert was inspected by the state, I believe, and it was deemed to be okay at that point when we were planning the Industrial Ave reconstruct. Is that correct?
Yeah, the state actually inspected it some years ago. We took a look at it before the referendum, and and everything looked good for an aging culvert. But in several months since, it's definitely shifted, and the cracks in the concrete are moving a little bit and that sort of thing. So we'll continue to monitor it certainly and keep a good eye on it.
And I appreciate that. I just want the public to understand that it's not like we didn't look at it or you all didn't look at it at the time. It was looked at, it was deemed appropriate at the time. Unfortunately, it's degraded faster than anybody thought. And unfortunately, we're here, we are. We would have probably preferred to done this all in one referendum. But unfortunately, the practicality of the decay didn't work that way. And unfortunately, threw us a curveball. So I just want the taxpayers in the community to know that it was something unforeseen and we just couldn't avoid it. So despite of your hard work. So thank you for that.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, just quickly add,
Yes.
and again, in speaking to what you were just saying, I think it is a testament to Cheshire's approach to really make sure before we go paving a road, just like we do with an RWA project or anything that's going to tear up the road soon after a newly repaved road, we do take great pains to just make sure that we aren't wasting any taxpayer dollars. So really part of that, yes, it's a little bit of bad news, but it's really part of an overall plan to not pay a lot of money to reconstruct this and then discover it a couple of years later. So I just wanted to echo that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball. So if there's no other questions or comments, I'll call for a vote. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Slocum.
Yeah, it begs one question. Is this decoupled from the other referendum item, even though it's part of the same project, or is this a non-referendum item?
It is decoupled from the other project. That they are two distinct projects, and we confirmed that with bond counsel previously. And so no, and then under our charter, given the dollar amount and the expected alternative funding sources, this would not end up being a referendum item at the dollar amounts proposed because the net taxpayer dollar amount is lower than $500,000.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Nowotny, for hanging in there with us.
Thank you. I'll be here for another couple.
Yeah, well, I don't think you got a problem with the road salt one. So anyway, although I laughed with the Morton salt. Is it the table salt? What do you just get a big truck of table salt?
It is, it's just need a little larger lid.
Anyway, we're going to move on to item 7, acceptance and appropriation of $128,205 steep grant for sidewalks at Curve Hill Road. Mr. Walsh.
Be it resolved that the town council approves resolution number 112420-4. Be it resolved that the town council accepts and appropriates a $128,205 small town economic assistance program STEEP grant for the Curve Hill Road sidewalk project. And be it further resolved that the town manager Sean M. Kimball be and hereby is authorized to accept on behalf of the town of Cheshire said 2020 Connecticut STEEP grant in the amount of $128,205 for the Curve Hill Road sidewalk project. And be it further resolved that the town manager Sean M. Kimball is hereby authorized to enter into and execute any and all agreements, contracts, and documents necessary to obtain said 2020 STEEP grant with the state of Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Back to you, Mr. Walsh.
Well, I want to just say, I appreciate this. This is something our constituents had approached us on, and having lived in this neighborhood, that area is pretty bad. It needs a total redone on the corners, especially for those people who walk to Chapman School. And I'm glad that we started this project. I can't remember how many months ago, and asked for this grant. I believe we're going to be paying for half of that as well. Sean, is that correct?
Yeah, just about 50%. Right?
So I think it's a great thing. We need to get this done for the safety of all the kids who are walking and the adults who we did have several people who talked about how bad the sidewalks were over in that area as well. So I'm glad this is getting done.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any questions or comments? Mr. Jenks?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is it it's a replacement or it's a totally new sidewalk?
This is a replacement. So right now, many of those sidewalks are asphalt, and this will replace them with concrete. The real cost, incidentally, comes in the upgrades to the handicap ramps that have to go down to Highland and the adjoining roads. Those, we need new pedestrian buttons and everything else there. So that's a large part of the cost of this. The actual run of sidewalk isn't terrible, but when you factor in all the traffic controls for pedestrians, that's where the money starts to really peak.
So is this an additional, this intersection is like an additional upgraded intersection in addition to the 2 or 3 others we're already doing? Is that right?
Yeah, correct. We're going to end up upgrading onto Curve Hill Road, Highland, of course, and then onto Country Club. So there'll be 8 new handicap ramps put in with this and associated pedestrian hardware to cross the street and trigger the lights and everything.
Jim, are you referring to the other spots on Route 10?
I was actually referring to other spots on Route 10, yeah.
Yeah, the state is doing those projects.
Correct.
George could touch on, but yeah, it's a separate.
Separate grant, okay. And
Yeah,
how much sidewalk is being replaced?
This is about 800 lineal feet of sidewalk. So it goes about 200 feet up Curve Hill Road and pretty close to 600 feet down or up Highland, north on Highland from Curve Hill. And there's a small section on Country Club.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
I think this is an important improvement. We did get a number of calls from people who use that area often. And, when I think, George, you had sent some staff out there, and kudos to staff because they recognized there were some issues there and they did a quick patch job just to make it safe and passable for people until we can obviously do a permanent repair. So thank you, George, to you and your staff for doing that. I think the community really appreciated it. And this is something that we weren't aware of. The community brought it to our attention. And thankfully, this council, as proactive as it is, was able to get it done. And I know we had some help from our legislation as well. So we thank them for their assistance. This is one situation that we all worked together and got something done for the community. So I'm glad we were able to do it. I think visually, it's also a good thing as well. As you're coming down Route 10, they're having the new sidewalks there instead of asphalt patches. I think will look a lot nicer as you come into the community. So, I think this is a good thing. I'm glad we were able to get it done, and the state will reimburse us half of it. So, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously. Thank you, George, for that. And then we'll get to the last one for you, Mr. Nowotny, the waiver of bid to purchase road salt, $95,000. And for that, I'll go to Mr. Borrowy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be it resolved that the town council approves resolution 112420-5, whereas the Public Works must purchase road salt for the treatment of roads in the winter, and whereas DRVN has submitted a price only slightly more than the lowest Capital Region Council of Governments bidder, and DVRN has proven to be better delivery times, offer better delivery times and a less corrosive product. Now therefore be it resolved that the town council approves a waiver of bid for the purchase of salt and authorizes purchasing from DVRN for $63.13 per ton for an estimated total of $95,000.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Barry. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Walsh, thank you. Mr. Barry.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's fairly self-explanatory. We have the opportunity to go with a company that's operationally more efficient for us with better delivery times, and they have a better environmental product, being less corrosive. And I think this is something that we should all support.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Mr. Nawatney, you want to add anything? Maybe we can just elucidate what the differential in cost was between the low bid and this. I think it was very minimal, correct?
Correct, yeah. The low bid was $61.30 a ton, and what we've driven, no pun intended, the price down to was $63.13, which is consistent with Morton's and Driven, both of which we've had good success with in the past.
So George, all kidding aside, is there any connection to Morton Salt that we use on our dinner table?
That I believe that is the same company.
It
So
is.
They,
Okay.
yeah, they are in the salt business for sure.
Yeah, the New York salt
Literally.
mines. Yeah. I had a question.
So we can go scrape the salt off the roads and bring it home and use it at the dinner table? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just wash the antifreeze off a little bit or something that's been spilled on the road.
Any other questions or comments?
Just a quick question. Yeah, the comment about it being less corrosive. Now, this isn't the slurry you mix up and drop out of the trucks in liquid form, is it?
No, that's a salt brine mixture, we call it. So this is a.
This is the
salt
rock
with-
type of salt you guys drop down.
Correct, and there's what we call straight salt, which is just salt crystals that we'll use in certain storms, and then there's treated salt, and that's what this particular product is.
And that's how it's less corrosive because
correct.
it's been treated. Okay, it was just a clarification. That's all. Thanks.
Right. There's some inhibitors
Enough
in
said.
it and everything. Sure.
Yep.
Yep.
Got you. Thank
Thank you, guys. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously. Thank you, George, for being here and getting through those through a few items. And Chief Strife, I think he's gone, but thank you for him staying in as well tonight. Give us a lot of data on his subject matter. So with that, if there's no other council business, we're going to move to an adjournment. Ask for a motion to adjourn. Mr. Romano, thank you.
Second.
Second by who?
Sandy, me.
Sandy, you were the one that made the
I
motion.
think Jim
didn't you?
Jinx, I think Jim Jinx seconded it.
So Mr.
Jim
Jim
has
seconded
seconded.
it. All
Yeah.
in favor?
Okay.
Aye.
Aye. Usually we don't have any trouble getting people to second adjournments, but I guess we're having fun tonight. Thank you all for being here. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody in our community. I hope everybody has
Happy
a
Thanksgiving.
safe and healthy holiday.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Stay safe.
Good night. Happy
everybody.
Thanksgiving. Take care.
Hey, George, can we
Good
get
night.
some of that salt for for Thanksgiving? That'd be great.
Turkey. Yeah, right.
Only if it snows.
Good night,
man.
everybody.
Only if it's perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See you later. Have a good one. Stay well.